Chapter 1340. White-haired Bufang. On the Netherworld ship, you saw Bufang's hair turn white, and a strange look came over her face. This familiar white, that arrogant Bufang is here? Tyrant body boy! It's been a long time. The corners of white-haired Bufang's mouth curved upward into an evil smile. He grabbed the fortune flatbread and bit into it with a crunch. The flatbread was crushed in an instant, then he put it in his mouth and chewed. The fortune energy poured into his mouth, turned into a mysterious energy, and poured into Bufang's body. Crunch, crunch, crunch. In a flash, a whole fortune flatbread went down his stomach. A gulp rang out. White-haired Bufang swallowed the flatbread. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lip. Tyrant Patriarch's pupils constricted as he stared at white-haired Bufang. When his eyes met the latter's sharp sword eyes, he shuddered. "What did you say?" Tyrant Patriarch roared. "Tyrant body boy? Who in the entire netherworld dared to call me Tyrant Patriarch? This reckless boy in front of me. It seems you haven't recognized me yet. But don't worry, you'll soon know who I am," white-haired Bufang said, twitching his mouth. Then, his eyes moved and rested in the distance. There, Sword Demon Patriarch and the others were all watching. In his spirit sea, why did he eat the fortune flatbread? Bufang asked, looking at the situation outside with an expressionless face. How can he fight if he doesn't eat it? Little host's strength has improved very fast, but Tyrant Body Boy is, after all, the great sage. Without some external means, White Tiger won't be able to defeat him. The Golden Divine Dragon hovered beside Bufang, shaking his head. But it's good that you didn't use the Divine Power Liquid Drop. It's very useful. It's a waste to kill a great sage. Bufang didn't think so. He wasn't familiar with the effect of the Divine Power Liquid Drop. Perhaps it was very useful, but if it couldn't be used in an effective way, then no matter how useful it was, it would become useless. "Can you beat them after eating the fortune flatbread?" Bufang brought the topic back. The Golden Divine Dragon glanced at Bufang and suddenly smiled mischievously. "That's right," he smiled. It was as if he was mocking Bufang. "Little host, do you think everyone is as unlucky as you?" The Golden Divine Dragon shook his head once more. 2 fortune flatbreads and a death food tool actually didn't kill that tyrant body brat. You didn't even touch a bit of the fortune flatbreads. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. At the very least, he managed to leave Tyrant Patriarch riddled with scars. "If it were me, Nicholas the Handsome Dragon, I would have been able to kill that Overlord Body Kid with a mouthful of creation gas and a wok." The Golden Divine Dragon was so excited that his body was twitching. As an artifact spirit, his luck won't be too bad, especially the White Tiger. The Golden Divine Dragon said. Boom! White-haired Bufang's aura began to seethe. From the 9 revolutions Little Saint level, he broke through the shackles in an instant. A white flame suddenly emerged around Bufang. As soon as it appeared, the void twisted. Boom! A white tiger heaven stove emerged above Bufang's head, and a misty small world emerged in it. In the small world, thousands of flames were burning, boiling, and thousands of worlds were collapsing. 1st revolution, 2nd revolution, 3rd revolution, 4th revolution. His aura rose steadily. In a short while, he reached the 7 revolutions great sage. Roar! White-haired Bufang jerked his head up, his white eyes blazing with flames. There was a loud bang. His aura soared again. Terrifying and scorching flames blazed, causing the entire Star Wars battlefield to distort. 8 revolutions, 9 revolutions, boom! His white hair seemed to fly backward. His aura could suppress the heavens. The white flames surrounding his body continued to linger around him. In the end, they condensed into a bright white flaming tiger in the air. The tiger opened its mouth and let out a deafening roar. It roared into the sky. With a single thought, he became the 9 revolutions great sage. In his spirit sea, Bufang was dumbfounded. He had always thought that eating a fortune flatbread to go from the 9 revolutions little saint to the 9 revolutions great sage was a joke. It was a slogan he used to fool people. But now, it seemed that wasn't the case. White Tiger, this arrogant fellow, was actually so lucky. Bufang had eaten a fortune flatbread before, but it only made his divine will a little stronger. Compared to White Tiger's luck, that level of improvement was rubbish. White Tiger's luck is really awesome. But that's because I didn't go. My luck is even more heaven-defying. The golden divine dragon said, crossing his arms over his chest. The black tortoise and the vermilion bird rolled their eyes. Bufang didn't understand, but he thought it was awesome. In the battlefield of the stars, everyone was stunned. They couldn't believe their eyes as they watched Bufang's cultivation base climb steadily and reach a terrifying level that made their hearts tremble. From the 9 revolutions little saint to the 9 revolutions great sage in a single thought. This kind of impossible thing actually happened in front of them. Clatter in the meteorite, rubble rolled down. Great sage Acheron climbed out of it, coughing up a mouthful of blood. Looking at Bufang in the distance, his aura surging, he was shocked. So strong. I didn't expect my little friend Bufang to be so lucky. Great sage Acheron sat cross-legged on the meteorite, watching seriously. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes turned bloodshot. That's not right. Why isn't he bald after becoming stronger? Why am I bald after becoming stronger? It's not fair. This was a very serious topic. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes were filled with horror. He stepped back step by step in the starry sky. He looked at the colorful white tiger around white-haired Bufang. And then he saw Bufang's familiar eyes. Tyrant Patriarch's body suddenly trembled. It was as if he had recalled some distant memory. You, Tyrant Patriarch was horrified. He pointed at white-haired Bufang in his memory. Tyrant Patriarch had seen this kind of situation before. However, this person was different. You really are his inheritor. Tyrant Patriarch took a deep breath. Kill. Boundless killing intent suddenly boiled up. His chest muscles kept trembling as if they were about to explode. Boom. He threw out a dazzling golden fist that seemed to be able to destroy the stars. The power of this punch was extremely terrifying. White-haired Bufang was shrouded in flames. He raised his hand, clenched his fist, and felt the terrible power surging in his body. The corners of his mouth twitched. He raised his chin proudly and gave Tyrant Patriarch a sideways glance. White-haired Bufang didn't retreat. Instead, he threw out a fist wrapped in flames. Boom! Tyrant Patriarch's fist collided with white-haired Bufang's in the void. A violent explosion spread out as if it was causing the stars to vanish. A terrible explosion shook the heavens. After the punch, both of them disappeared from where they were. They collided again in the sky 10,000 meters above the ground. Their fists collided without any fancy move. Every time they collided, a mighty energy rumbled. It's useless. I'm the great sage of the perfected stage. Even if you become the great sage of the 9 revolution, you're still weaker than me. Tyrant Patriarch roared. He punched, kicked, whipped, and elbowed. His whole body had turned into a great killing weapon. His terrifying muscles bulged like dragons. The two collided in an instant. In just a breath's time, they had punched hundreds of times in a row. The Tyrant clan became a saint with their fleshly bodies, which were the strength they were most proud of. They were invincible when it came to fleshly bodies. Boom! A rumbling sound rang out. White-haired Bufang was knocked flying away. However, as he was sent flying, he disappeared in a flash. When he reappeared, he was behind Tyrant Patriarch. After so many years, you've grown a lot stronger, but in my eyes you're all trash. He snorted arrogantly. White-haired Bufang punched Tyrant Patriarch. Tyrant Patriarch was knocked flying away. Tyrant Patriarch, of course, was not willing to give up, so he came back again. The two of them were engaged in a fierce fight. The scene of the battle shocked everyone. Hades' mouth fell open, his face blank. He didn't expect that Bufang would become so strong. A second ago, he was still a 9-revolution little saint, but the next moment, he had become a 9-revolution great sage. Did Bufang have such heaven-defying luck? Sword Demon Patriarch and the others trembled. Their hearts trembled as they watched white-haired Bufang fight Tyrant Patriarch. When they saw the familiar whistling sound enveloped by flames, they recalled some scenes they didn't want to recall. Rumble! In the starry sky, a multicolored white tiger, covered in flames, clawed, bit, and whipped its tail, and attacked with terrifying force. He was fighting Tyrant Patriarch in the starry sky. The white tiger battled Tyrant body. The battle shocked everyone. Wounds gradually appeared on Tyrant Patriarch's body. There were still white flames burning on the wound. The raging flames made the tyrant body even more ferocious, and his eyes turned red. That man is dead. Why didn't you disappear with him? His fist shook the starry sky, and he roared. The only reply he got was a sneer from the white tiger. The fluctuations of the battle spread in waves. The battlefield of the stars seemed to be stirred. The ripples of energy continued to spread out. Great Sage Acheron watched with relish. Suddenly, he thought of something. He stepped into the void and soon came to Patriarch Horned Demon's body. Then, he put away the corpse that was as big as a small mountain. Great Sage Acheron smiled happily. Rumble! One meteor after another exploded. Flames spread across the void. A tiger claw slashed down. Tyrant Patriarch's body spun and smashed into a meteorite, shattering it and turning it into 1,000,000 pieces. His body was covered with bloody wounds, and golden blood flowed out of them. The flames burned on the wounds, preventing his body from healing. Tyrant Patriarch panted violently. Rumble! Flames swept out. White-haired Bufang walked out of the starry sky with his chin raised, looking very proud. He raised his hand and flames gathered on it, turning it into a tiger claw. You can't kill me, Tyrant Patriarch said as he floated up. Suddenly, a loud laugh burst out of his mouth. The laughter lingered in the sky, and it caused everyone to be extremely shocked. Do you think you can kill me? How long can you last with a piece of flatbread to improve your cultivation base? I can already feel your exhaustion. Once the time is up and your cultivation base recedes, it will be time for me to counterattack. At that time, I will crush your body inch by inch, break them inch by inch. Tyrant Patriarch grinned, his face filled with a grim expression. White-haired Bufang furrowed his brows. One breath of fortune energy could not last for too long. Bufang could already feel his power beginning to recede. Yes. I can't hold it for too long. It's not enough. Now this level of power is enough for me to use that move. The tyrant body is said to be immortal, isn't it? Let's see if you can withstand this move of mine. White-haired Bufang grinned. Then, his mind flickered. A stove emerged over his head once again. The white tiger heaven stove seemed to be emitting a tiger's roar. The stove flew over, expanded in an instant, and eventually turned into a behemoth that blotted out the sky. Rumble! Like a prison, Tyrant Patriarch was imprisoned in it. Tyrant Patriarch's eyes widened. Feeling the boiling flames around him, he roared. His fist landed on the wall of the white tiger heaven stove, but it didn't shake the wall at all. Damn it! Let me out! For the first time, fear came into Tyrant Patriarch's eyes. White-haired Bufang crossed his arms over his chest and hovered in midair. The corners of his mouth curved upward slightly. The white tiger is in charge of killing. Do you think I'm joking? Rumble! As soon as his voice rang out, Tyrant Patriarch's figure in the white tiger heaven stove was devoured by the boiling flames. Only his miserable howls were left echoing through the heavens. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. In the distance, Sword Demon Patriarch and the others were shaking violently. Their eyes were filled with horror. Could it be that Tyrant Patriarch was going to die here today? He was the third strongest expert among the 9 nether prison clans. All of a sudden, the whole starry sky seemed to stand still. A hole was torn open in the starry sky. Then, an arm reached out of it, grabbing toward the white tiger heaven stove. "That's enough," a deafening voice rang through the heavens. Sword Demon Patriarch and the others were excited when they sensed the aura. "It's Nether Puppeteer Patriarch." Nether Puppeteer Patriarch could crush everything when he attacked. White-haired Bufang focused his eyes and stared at the arm that had reached out. His sword eyes were full of seriousness. Are those 2 fellows finally unable to stand it? Suddenly, white-haired Bufang's heart skipped a beat. He jerked his head to look at the void behind him. Behind him, the void was torn apart, and a terrible and majestic aura spread out of it. The void was collapsing. Then, an exquisite dog paw burning with black earth prison flame reached out of it. A gentle and magnetic voice suddenly spread through the starry sky and filled the entire area. Chapter 1341. A gentle and magnetic voice immediately reverberated throughout the world. Everyone was surprised and jerked their heads up to look at the rift in the void. It had split in 2 directions. Some terrible existence was trying to find a way out of it. The tyrant patriarch howled miserably in the white tiger heaven stove. The scorching flames enveloped his body, burning him constantly. Although the tyrant patriarch's body was invincible, he still suffered great pain from the burning flames. His miserable howls rang in everyone's ears, making their hair stand on end. White-haired Bufang raised his chin proudly, his eyes cold. He looked emotionlessly at Tyrant Patriarch, who was being burned by the white flames. In the distance, Sword Demon Patriarch and the other experts were already dumbfounded, and they felt a chill run down their spines. They couldn't believe that Tyrant Patriarch was sealed in the stove and kept burning. Sword Demon Patriarch's eyes were full of horror. Looking at white-haired Bufang, he seemed to recall something from the depths of his mind. The white flames burned and Tyrant Patriarch's miserable howls seemed to ring in his ears. Rumble! A rift suddenly tore open between heaven and earth, and a hand reached out of it, aiming straight at Bufang. "That's enough!" A deafening voice rang out, filling everyone with a sense of supreme majesty. Sword Demon Patriarch was very excited because he knew that Nether Puppeteer Patriarch had made a move. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch ranked second among the 9 Nether Prison Patriarch. Compared with the mysterious D Ting, he was the backbone of the 9 Nether Prison Patriarchs. As long as Nether Puppeteer Patriarch made a move, any trouble would be solved. Tian Tsang, who had dominated the world and fought his way to Nether Prison, was invincible. However, when he faced Nether Puppeteer Patriarch, he was defeated, and his invincible momentum was hindered. That was why he was assassinated and fell. Therefore, as soon as Nether Puppeteer Patriarch made a move, Sword Demon Patriarch and the others felt that they would win this match. Rumble! Rumble! Flames kept burning in the white tiger heaven stove. A vast amount of energy was rapidly dispersing from Tyrant Patriarch's body. He opened his mouth and kept howling. Rumble! Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's palm came flying toward white-haired Bufang. He wanted to slap Bufang to death. White-haired Bufang's eyes narrowed. He also felt an unparalleled pressure. Tyrant Patriarch was the great sage of the Great Perfection Realm. Above the 9 revolutions was the Great Perfection Realm, and there were different levels among the Great Perfection Realm. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch had been a perfected expert for many years, and he had stayed there for a long time. He had touched the barrier of the Great Sage's realm, and he only needed half a step to break through to the Supreme Realm. It was above the entire Netherworld. The aura of this expert was much stronger than that of Tyrant Patriarch. Every increase in strength was an unparalleled advantage and suppression. White-haired Bufang couldn't help but frown in the face of such pressure. The enhancement of the fortune flatbread had begun to wane, so he would have to pay a huge price to resist Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's palm. However, as the void was torn apart, an exquisite dog paw shrouded in black earth prison flame thrust out. As soon as the paw appeared, Hades' Era and the others were excited. Mangy dog! Earth prison dog? The Lord go? Cries of alarm rang out incessantly. White-haired Bufang looked at the dog paw and narrowed his eyes slightly. How dare you bully the Lord Go's man when the Lord Go is not here? A gentle and magnetic voice rang through the whole world. The next moment, the dog paw slapped down toward Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's palm. The expressions of Sword Demon Patriarch and the others changed slightly. Then they sneered. That mangy dog is strong, but he's only as strong as Tyrant Patriarch. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch is much stronger than Tyrant Patriarch. I can't believe this mangy dog dares to attack Tyrant Patriarch. They were very excited. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was the top expert among the 9 clans, and he was the foundation of their rule in the Netherworld. How could a mere mangy dog stop him? Even if this Earth prison dog was amazing, so what? In the face of absolute power, everything would be crushed. Rumble! Nether Puppeteer Patriarch didn't say anything. He slapped down with his palm. The void kept trembling and collapsing, and ripples spread out in all directions. Meteorites in the starry sky kept crumbling under the power of the palm, turning into rubble and scattering in all directions. Shrouded in earth prison flame, the dog paw came slapping down. Without dodging, it collided with the palm. Boom! A terrible explosion shook the void. Everyone felt as if their eardrums were about to be torn apart. Tremendous energy rose into the sky like a tidal wave and rumbled down. Their hearts were filled with shock. A battle of this level simply caused one's hair to stand on end. Evenly matched. They're actually evenly matched. Sword Demon Patriarch and the others shuddered and were horrified. White-haired Bufang's white hair waved in the air as the energy collided. His vermilion robe let out a sonorous bird cry, turned crimson, and wrapped around his body. Rumble! A crimson flame seemed to be burning, forming a supreme defense that blocked all the energy that poured down. White-haired Bufang focused his eyes and stared at the white tiger heaven stove. Inside the stove, Tyrant Patriarch was still howling miserably. After all, he was the great sage of the perfected realm. Although the white tiger heaven stove suppressed him, it would take a long time to burn him. Sizzle! Someone saw Tyrant Patriarch bathed in flames inside the stove, as if he had turned into a flaming man. He struggled and roared incessantly. He kept punching, but he still couldn't get out. The inside of the white tiger heaven stove seemed to have turned into a world of flames. It was going to burn him to death. How dare you! Nether Puppeteer Patriarch flew into a rage. His voice exploded in the sky like a thunderclap, rumbling endlessly. Another palm shot out. The power of this palm grew more and more terrifying. Moreover, when Hades' Era and the others saw it, their pupils constricted. The palm seemed to be made of steel, and it didn't look like a human hand. It emitted a cold light. The palm came down. Heaven and earth fell silent. With the Lord Go here, how dare you act violently? A gentle and magnetic voice rang out again, aimed at Nether Puppeteer Patriarch. Another palm shot out. This time, earth prison fire was still surging. The two collided again. The void crumbled. Terrible fluctuations forced many people to retreat. They retreated further and further until they could only watch the battle from a distance. This kind of battle frightened many great sage. Just the aftermath of the battle was enough to make people's hearts palpitate, and they didn't dare to approach. They were all great sage, but why was the gap between them so huge? However, there was an exception. White-haired Bufang was still sitting cross-legged in the center of the battle, motionless like a 10,000-year-old pine tree. No matter how terrible the power was or how violent the impact of the energy was, it couldn't shake him. White-haired Bufang's hair fluttered in the wind as he raised his chin proudly. Sizzle! Suddenly, a shocking scene appeared in the white tiger heaven stove. Tyrant Patriarch's body began to melt at a speed visible to the naked eye. Like butter being roasted at a high temperature, he melted at a speed visible to the naked eye as if he was about to melt into a puddle of water. His thick and powerful arms went limp and drooped to the ground. Flames burned in them. His hands melted, turned into liquid, and dripped to the ground. His flesh collapsed, and one hole after another burst open. His head was full of cracks. His miserable howls shook the heavens. However, as time went by, his howls gradually disappeared, and he couldn't even scream anymore. He had turned into a puddle of boiling liquid in the stove. Hiss! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. A madman! He was simply a madman. The mighty Tyrant Patriarch was burned to death by Bufang. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch flew into a rage when he sensed that, and his attacks became fiercer. However, Lord Dog's Earth Prison Flame attack was also unceasingly bombarding. Although neither of them showed up, the collision of their attacks alone was enough to crush everyone present. Buzz, after a long time, everything in the stove returned to silence. Tyrant Patriarch was completely silent. All that was left was the blazing fire in the stove. The fire crackled and was scorching hot, but it made people feel extremely cold. Although it was a fire, it emitted a coldness as cold as ice. Tyrant Patriarch was dead. Buzz Bufang's hair began to transform at a speed visible to the naked eye. From white to black. The white tiger returned to Bufang's spirit sea, and its pupils became gentle, losing the sharpness from before. Bufang was also shocked. Tyrant Patriarch was a mighty existence. He was the great sage, who ranked third among the 9 nether prison clans. Even Hades Tenzang couldn't kill him. And now Bufang had done it. Of course, he did it with the help of the artifact spirit. But it was still incredible. The fall of a perfected great sage was a great shock to the whole netherworld. For nether prison, it was an unbearable loss. Rumble! The void crumbled. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch stopped attacking. The void was torn apart. A figure was faintly discernible in the turbulence of the void. A pair of terrible eyes emerged, staring straight at Bufang. Tyrant Patriarch and Horned Beast are dead in this battle, leaving only 7 of the 9 Nether Prison Patriarchs. Nether Prison will not accept this price. All of you will die with them. His words were full of terrible meaning. It made the hearts of Hades' era and the others tremble. Nether Prison unifies the netherworld and builds a great world. This is what the Great Path needs. No one can stop it. You can't do it. Anyone who tries to stop it will be punished. Buzz Bufang stood proudly in the starry sky. His face was indifferent. Suddenly, in the turbulence, a gaze suddenly fell on Bufang. It was as if it was looking down at him from the 9th heaven. The gaze was so deep that it seemed to tear Bufang's mind apart. Behind Bufang, the void was torn apart. There were also endless turbulence churning in it. A slender figure of a dog with flames all over its body appeared. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's eyes seemed to be fixed on the dog. Their gazes swept across the turbulence and collided. What do you have? Lord Go, I'm waiting, a gentle and magnetic voice rang out. They looked at each other for a long time. Then, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's pupils constricted. Impossible. A dog like you actually wants to take that step? Impossible. You can't do it. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was suddenly very excited. He roared. However, the only response he got was Lord Go's disdainful laugh. You can't succeed. Just you wait. I'll stop you. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was still roaring. The next moment, the void in front of him slowly healed. Then it disappeared. Bufang stood in the sky, his vermilion robe flapping noisily in the howling wind. Then, the dog in the void turned slowly, as if it had stepped into the depths of the turbulence. The void gradually healed up. Lord Dog didn't say anything and disappeared once again. This only left many doubts in the minds of the people present. Bufang frowned. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said Lord Go was going to take that step? That step. What step was it? The white tiger heaven stove returned to Bufang's side. It turned into a streak of white light and became a belt that was tied around his waist. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and rolled his eyes. Suddenly, he looked into the distance. There, Sword Demon Patriarch and the others were gathered. They seemed to be frightened by Bufang's glance. This guy was the ruthless man who had killed Tyrant Patriarch. Without hesitation, the Sword Demon Patriarch and the others turned around and sped downward, disappearing into the distance in just a few moments. For a moment, the battlefield of the stars became very quiet. The battle seemed to have ended for the time being. Chapter 1342. The Nether Prison Army retreated in defeat. The great sage of Nether Prison also retreated because of the Lord Go's appearance and the suppression of Nether Puppeteer Patriarch. A fierce invasion war ended with the defeat of the Nether Prison army. Of course, everyone knew that this was not the end. Although the Nether Prison army was defeated, they would surely make a comeback, and the next time would be even more tragic. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch and D Ting, the strongest expert among the 9 Nether Prison clans, did not take part in the battle, though for some reason. For some reason, it gave Earth Prison a chance to catch its breath. Tyrant Patriarch was dead. Once the news got back to Nether Prison, the whole place would be in an uproar. Tyrant Patriarch, the great sage of the perfected realm, the soul of the Tyrant clan, had fallen in this war. To the experts of the Tyrant lineage, this was simply like a disaster, shocking and shocking. Without Tyrant Patriarch, the status of the Tyrant clan would decline sharply, and they would even become the weakest of the 9 clans. Although the great sage was still in charge of the Tyrant clan, the loss of Tyrant Patriarch, who could support the whole clan, made it difficult for the Tyrant clan to have that kind of power. The battlefield of the stars gradually became quiet. All that was left were the broken meteorites and the great sage's blood. Since ancient times, the battlefield of the stars had a city of the great sage's tomb, and countless great sages had fallen here. The battle between Nether Prison and Earth Prison was comparable to the battle when Hades Tenzang attacked Nether Prison. The number of great sages who died in that battle was also innumerable. However, Earth Prison had suffered a crushing defeat in that battle, and this time, it was Nether Prison that had suffered a crushing defeat. In imprisoned Dragon Pass, on the city wall, the Earth Prison experts all raised their arms and cheered. All of them were extremely excited. They were so excited that they could hardly control their emotions. It was not an easy battle, and Earth Prison had suffered heavy casualties. Some aristocratic families were even completely annihilated. But this was war. If it hadn't been for Bufang's fortune flatbread, Earth Prison would have fallen long ago. This battle was famous only for the fortune flatbread. 1 piece of cake, 1 piece of fortune, 1 piece of cake, turning the situation around. Above imprisoned Dragon Pass, looking at the deathly aura permeating the battlefield, smoke rising into the sky, corpses covered the ground, and blood flowing like a river. Everyone was silent. At this moment, the cruelty of war was on full display in front of them. Ice Saint stood on the city wall in her white dress and looked at the devastated land. She let out a long sigh. Bufang and the others were standing on it. The great sage Acheron squinted his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, as if something good had happened. He looked at Bufang and wanted to say something, but stopped himself. "Forget it, I'll discuss it with you when we get back to the restaurant." The great sage Acheron grinned. You stood at Bufang's side and said nothing. Hades Era and Yinglong had gone to maintain order after the war. Although the war was over for a short time, it didn't mean that everything was over. Nether Prison's desire to unify the Netherworld would certainly not be extinguished like this. So, Nether Prison would definitely start over again. When that time came, it would bring even more terrible killing intent, because that time, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch, D Ting, and other supreme existences might all participate in the war. However, Earth Prison lacked such experts. Bufang seemed to suddenly think of something. He looked at the great sage Acheron and Ice Saint. They had lived the longest, so they might know the answer. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said that the Lord Go is going to take the last step? And he will definitely stop him? What does that mean? The great sage Acheron and Ice Saint looked at each other, their faces growing serious. Tell him, little sister. The great sage Acheron glanced at Ice Saint and said after a moment of thought. Ice Saint nodded. Do you know why Di Ting and Nether Puppeteer Patriarch didn't participate in this war? She asked. Bufang shook his head, puzzled. This was also what puzzled Bufang. If Nether Puppeteer Patriarch and Di Ting joined the war, Earth Prison would never be able to withstand their attack. Because they can't participate in the war. At their level, they have to think about the higher level. That level is like a hazy fog, unfathomable and unfathomable, Ice Saint said. Hades Tenzang once touched this level, but he gave up. He chose to conquer the world and Nether Prison. Di Ting should have reached this level as well. As for Nether Puppeteer Patriarch, he may be a little weaker. However, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch needs to protect Di Ting from being disturbed, so he didn't come to Earth Prison this time. Bufang listened and nodded with an expressionless face. So, what you're saying is that Lord Dog has also reached that level. How can the Lord Go reach out his claws? Ice Saint's long eyelashes fluttered slightly. Looking at Bufang, she said, Earth Prison Dog should have just stepped into that level. That's why he could easily break free and help. When the critical moment comes, a little disturbance could lead to failure. Bufang was lost in thought. No wonder Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was so shocked when he learned the Lord Go has reached that level. When Di Ting stabilizes and Nether Puppeteer Patriarch is free, I'm afraid he will destroy Earth Prison Dog's breakthrough, said Ice Saint. Bufang nodded. Perhaps the Lord Go has his own plan. The battle shocked all the small worlds around the Netherworld. No one thought that Earth Prison could resist Nether Prison's all-out attack. Even Tyrant Patriarch and Horned Demon Patriarch died tragically on the battlefield of the stars. The Vajra realm experts clenched their fists excitedly. Their realm was destroyed by Tyrant Patriarch. In terms of fleshly body, the Vajra realm was much weaker than the Tyrant clan. Unfortunately, the Vajra realm had become Nether Prison's vassal. But that didn't stop them from being excited when they learned of Tyrant Patriarch's tragic death. The West Little Buddhism realm, the Wandering Soul realm, and the other small worlds were all boiling. The unstoppable Nether Prison was defeated in the battle with Earth Prison. Earth Prison was worthy of its reputation. Even without Hades Tenzang, it was still not a force to be trifled with. However, they also knew that Earth Prison's resistance to Nether Prison's invasion was only temporary. Nether Prison's goal was to unify the Netherworld and turn it into a great world, with Nether Prison as its center. Nether Prison would never give up its conquest of Earth Prison. Soon, when the Great World Plan was launched, Earth Prison would not be able to withstand Nether Prison's crazy attack. Earth Prison in Acheron City, Acheron Little Restaurant. The street in front of the restaurant was in full swing again. The war was over, and the fame of the brilliant Fortune flatbreads had spread throughout Earth Prison. Now, almost everyone in Earth Prison knew the name of Acheron's Little Restaurant. It was a magical dish that could turn the tide of a war. However, it was a pity that after the war, the store's owner had cut down on the sales of the Fortune flatbread. Originally, each person could buy 3 flatbreads a day, but now they could only buy 1. However, most people didn't complain. They were happy as long as they could buy 1. Some aristocratic families even sent people to wait in front of the restaurant. As soon as the door was opened, they would buy flatbreads. If they had enough flatbreads, they would come in handy in the future war. None of the aristocratic families were stupid. Earth Prison seemed to have won the war this time, but only the people of Earth Prison knew the crisis. Once Nether Prison attacked again, Earth Prison would not be able to withstand it. If Nether Prison attacked again, there would definitely be stronger experts involved. At that time, Earth Prison, without a top expert, would not be able to withstand it. Although the war was not only a matter of top experts, if the top experts were not matched, how could Earth Prison resist the war? After all, in this world, the strong had the right to speak. Ting-a-ling! The kitchen curtain was lifted by Bufang. Bufang walked out of it. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing his fair arms, and held a basket of fortune flatbreads in both hands. The steaming flatbreads had now become the best-selling dish in Acheron's little restaurant. With a thud, a basket of pancakes was placed on the table of the restaurant. This was the last basket of flatbreads for the day. Bufang could only make a limited amount of flatbreads every day, about 3 baskets. Once they were all sold out, he would not continue to sell them. The customers waiting in line could not wait any longer. They paid for the fortune flatbreads at the same time. The fortune flatbreads were bought. Some people bought fortune flatbreads for the fortune energy contained in them. Some people bought pancakes just for the taste of the pancake. Apart from the magical fortune energy, the taste of the flatbreads also made many people fall for them. Some people came from thousands of miles away and spent tens of thousands of nether crystals just to have a taste of the flatbread. When the last fortune flatbreads were sold out, Bufang told the customers who were still waiting in line that the sale was over for the day. Of course, some people felt it was a pity, but some people were still waiting in line. Even if it was not for the flatbreads, it was worth waiting for other delicacies. Sizzle, flames rose to the sky. The cooking in the kitchen was in full swing. After the war, the business of the restaurant picked up again. You temporarily became a waitress and helped Bufang serve the dishes, which saved Bufang a lot of trouble. Sometimes, little who would help you, and he was quite obedient. The steaming red braised meat was sparkling and translucent under the light, making Foxy salivate uncontrollably. Being a waitress was also a kind of torture, especially for a foodie like Little Who. So, Little Who couldn't help but run back to the heaven and earth farmland. Great Sage Acheron occasionally came to the restaurant, but he only ordered a dish to go with wine and sat at the table happily. Holding the jade jar, he touched the mouth of the jar with his mouth and took a sip of the wine. He only moistened his lips with the wine. Then, he gulped down the food as if he was enjoying it. This kind of life made Great Sage Acheron feel quite comfortable. At least, it was much happier than the days when he only knew how to hold grass. Hades' era finally regained his freedom. Now, whenever he was free, he would come to Acheron's little restaurant and pester Bufang, just for the spicy strips. However, Bufang didn't make things difficult for him and gave him the spicy strip. Then, with the spicy strip in his mouth, he chatted with some people in the restaurant. After chatting for a while, he would swallow the spicy strip. His happy expression made him feel like he was immersed in it. Because of a small restaurant, the remote Acheron city, which no one cared about, seemed to have become the central city of Earth Prison. All the aristocratic families had sent their experts to buy houses in Acheron City. Some rogue cultivators also came to Acheron City because of its fame. People were constantly migrating from the surrounding towns and cities. The desolate Acheron City gradually expanded and became a big city. The city lord of Forbidden Soul City, which was now Acheron City, grinned from ear to ear. He came from an unknown small city lord, and suddenly became the famous city lord of the infernal realm. And all this was because of a restaurant. Of course, he was also a regular customer of this restaurant. The day's business was over. However, the nightlife of Acheron City had just begun. On the street, all kinds of steaming food stalls were set up. On both sides of the street, pedestrians came and went. There were lanterns, ceremonial lanterns, and all kinds of delicacies and snacks. Because of a restaurant, the commercial trade of Acheron City was boosted, making Acheron City a famous food city in Earth Prison. all kinds of special delicacies gathered in Acheron City. At night today, Bufang would no longer stay in the restaurant. He would take you and Little Hu out of the restaurant. They would wander on the streets of the city that never sleep. It was not bad to taste the delicacies of Earth Prison and experience its customs. Earth Prison was vast, but Bufang did not have time to visit all of it. He had only been to Goddess City before, and now he only wandered around in Acheron City. But for Bufang it was enough. The prosperity of Acheron City had attracted all kinds of delicacies from all over Earth Prison to this place. The name of Gourmet City was well deserved. At night, Bufang also liked to eat all kinds of delicacies. The atmosphere in Acheron City was very festive. You followed behind Bufang and looked around curiously. On both sides of the street there were steaming stalls. There were all kinds of delicacies on display, and the stall owners were also cooking. "How much is this, boss?" Bufang looked at a stall, which was surrounded by a group of people. The owner was smiling like a flower as he carried out his business. Bufang came to the front, pointed to the snack made of dough in the pot, and asked, "Young man, this is a special delicacy of Earth Prison. It's the black rice cake from the south of Earth Prison. It's very delicious. Would you like to have one?" The owner explained, looking at Bufang with a smile on his face. Bufang nodded. After paying the nether crystals, he took the black rice cake, held the bag, and ate it with nethery. On the roadside stalls there were all kinds of delicacies, such as grilled chicken feet, steamed overlord snails, fried noodles, and so on. It was dazzling. Just as Bufang and Nethery were enjoying their meal, a voice suddenly rang out. Bufang's footsteps suddenly stopped. A voice rang out in his head. "Huh!" Bufang was stunned. The voice was gentle and magnetic, but it rang out in Bufang's head. "Lord Go!" Bufang was slightly taken aback when he heard the voice. Chapter 1343. The Voice of the Lord Go? Bufang used a thin wooden stick to pick up a piece of black rice glutinous cake. This black rice glutinous cake looked like a sparkling black agate, as if it was shining brightly in the night. Hot steam lingered over it, and the surface of the black rice glutinous rice cake was stained with bits of spirit fruit pulp. The Lord Go's gentle and magnetic voice resounded in his ears. Bufang subconsciously thought it was an illusion. Bufang released his divine will, but he could not sense the aura of the Lord Go within a radius of several hundred miles. So, the Lord Go's voice appeared in his head. Was it because he missed the Lord Go too much? Bufang opened his mouth wide and stuffed the black glutinous rice cake into his mouth. The soft black glutinous rice cake emitted warmth in his mouth. When he bit down, it was a little sticky, but at the same time, the fragrance and sweetness of the rice burst forth, giving him an indescribable sense of happiness. This kind of snack from hell was not bad. Bufang's mouth kept chewing. The Lord Go's voice became clear once more. This time, Bufang was really stunned. This sound didn't seem to be an illusion. Bufang raised his eyebrows. He waited for the voice to continue telling him. Sure enough, the voice resounded again a moment later. "Bufang brat. Lord Go, I'm hungry. Prepare a portion of sweet and sour dragon ribs for Lord Go. Once I'm full, I'll have the strength to continue fighting." Lord Go's gentle and magnetic voice sounded very serious. However, what he said made Bufang speechless. If Bufang's guess was right, the Lord Go had used 1,000 miles sound transmission technique, or even 10,000 miles sound transmission technique. This technique had a very high requirement on the spiritual will. Ordinary people wouldn't even be able to do it. Bufang could also send a voice transmission to others. After all, his spiritual force was quite strong. However, it could only work if the target was within the range of his spiritual force. Did the Lord Go spend so much effort to send him a voice transmission just for a bowl of sweet and sour dragon ribs? Okay, where are you? Bufang pondered for a moment, but in the end, he didn't reject it. Lord Go, I'm at the former site of the Black Temple. Come here in 3 days. During these 3 days, Lord Go, I need to break through a small obstacle. Lord Go said. After saying that, the customers gradually dispersed. Bufang was speechless. He had gone through so much trouble to transmit his voice from 1,000 miles away just for a plate of sweet and sour ribs. This fat dog was too obsessed with sweet and sour ribs. Yu was standing beside Bufang. When she saw Bufang suddenly standing still, she was speechless and blinked her big eyes. What? Is the black rice, glutinous rice, not delicious? Yu asked. Lord Go only sent a voice transmission to Bufang, so you didn't know anything. On her shoulder, Little Hu was sitting, holding a roasted phoenix foot and nibbling happily. Although Little Hu mainly ate explosive meatballs, he didn't refuse any other delicacies. He was a well-deserved foodie. Only half a month had passed since the war. Little Hu's body had grown horizontally, and he had gained a lot of weight. If his mother, the six-tailed fox, saw him, she wouldn't be able to recognize him. Is he a fox or a pig? It's nothing. This glutinous rice tastes good. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth and shook his head. Then, the two of them didn't say anything else. They turned around and went back into the restaurant. 3 days later, he would send Lord Go sweet and sour ribs to the former site of the Black Temple. Bufang suddenly understood. When Black Demon of the Black Temple died, Lord Go, Hades' era, and Yinglong prison overlord broke into it. Lord Go might have obtained some resources there. That was why he was in a state of breakthrough. The opportunity in the Black Temple gave Lord Go a chance to break through. That was why Lord Go didn't join the war. Bufang narrowed his eyes and nodded. It was just 3 days later, so Bufang wasn't in a hurry. He grabbed Little Hu. Bufang came to the Heaven and Earth farmland. Today, the Heaven and Earth farmland had become more and more vast. As his cultivation base improved, the farmland's area had also become vaster. The heaven tree swayed, and the senseless lotus emitted a bright light. The 9-revolution heavenly path tea tree continued to emit profound musical note. The entire Heaven and Earth farmland was like a paradise. Bufang came with Little Hu. Little Hu, who had gained a lot of weight, seemed to have released his nature. He followed 80, the 8 treasures pig, and the others, running wildly through the green grass of the farmland. Nyo Han-san came in front of Bufang with a smile on his face. Bufang's apprentice chefs, on the other hand, were exchanging and learning experiences with each other in the distance. After chatting with them for a while, Bufang entered the wooden hut. He began to study the gourmet array. Bufang hadn't found time to study the new gourmet array, the time array. That time in the battlefield of the stars, after throwing out the yin-yang fish pot, Bufang suddenly realized that the time array must have some effect. This array was named Time, which was very domineering. However, as for its effect, Bufang was also very curious. That was why he came to the Heaven and Earth farmland to study it. Naturally, he couldn't study it in a short time. So, in the next few days, during the day, Bufang's restaurant was open for business. At night, after eating some delicious food, he would enter the farmland to study the gourmet array, to make more powerful death food tools. However, he found that the time array was very unstable, and ordinary death food tools couldn't maintain it. Thus, the carrier of the time array became a point that Bufang needed to study carefully. On the 3rd day, sunlight shone into the restaurant. Bufang opened his eyes, stretching his body. He walked to the kitchen and began his daily cooking training. Cooking was a skill that could only be learned when one was old. One needed to continuously learn and practice every day in order to master it to its fullest. Sizzle. He prepared the dragon meat and marinated it. Then, he put it into a wok, cooking and stir-frying. Soon, a steaming bowl of sweet and sour dragon ribs was done. He poured it into a flat blue and white porcelain plate, then poured the orange-red sauce over it, making the aroma even more enticing. A plate of sweet and sour dragon ribs was done. Bufang put the sweet and sour dragon ribs into the food box he had prepared. Then, he walked out of the restaurant, about to close the door and leave. Because it was still early, the customers in the queue were in twos and threes. They were all very surprised by Bufang's appearance. Bufang didn't explain much. He just took a wooden board. On the board, he wrote the words, "Rest for a day." Carrying the food box, he strode away. Great Sage Acheron dashed over. He saw Bufang from a distance. Today, he came to find Bufang. He didn't expect Bufang to go out so early. He had something good to exchange with Bufang. Since Bufang hadn't left, he hurried over to tell him. However, when he found out that Bufang was going to give food to the Earth prison dog, Great Sage Acheron was very surprised, and he asked him to go with him. Bufang didn't refuse. It just so happened that Bufang was still a little confused about how to get to the Black Temple's old site. So, with Great Sage Acheron's help, it saved him a lot of trouble. The two of them sped up, treading the air. After a while, they landed in front of the Black Temple's old site. After the fall of Black Demon, the mysterious power that shrouded the Black Temple disappeared. All the experts in the Black Temple were killed by that power. After a forbidden land lost its master, it was no longer qualified to be a forbidden land. All unrelated people would be killed, because they didn't belong to this era. The Black Temple was a majestic palace. The roof was sharp, like many sharp swords, piercing the sky. Each sword was so sharp that it seemed to reflect a cold light. This was the Black Temple, the once glorious Black Temple. Bufang and Great Sage Acheron arrived outside the Black Temple. The current Black Hall was already in ruins, and its door was covered with dog paw prints. Without a doubt, those dog paw prints were left by the Lord Go. Obviously, the Lord Go had harassed the Black Temple many times before. The Lord Go should know that there was something in the Black Temple that could help him break through. Ha ha ha! I can imagine Black Demon's constipated face when he was harassed by that mangy dog. Great Sage Acheron laughed when he saw the exquisite dog paw prints on the Black Temple's door. The corner of Bufang's mouth also twitched slightly. The two of them didn't stay for long. Bufang raised his hand and pushed open the Black Temple's door. Creak! The Black Temple's door suddenly opened on both sides, and a majestic black aura spread out, as if it was wrapping people's bodies. Tap, tap, tap as they walked in, only the clear sound of footsteps could be heard. Of course, there were also the scattered bandages on the ground. The Black Temple used to be quite glorious. Unfortunately, the change of an era had turned the once glorious force into ruins. The Black Temple was covered in a layer of dust, as if it had been covered in dust for an era. The Black Temple's experts who used to live in it were like bubbles and illusions. If Bufang hadn't killed the Black Demon with his own hands, he would have known that the Black Demon was real. Perhaps he would have fallen into the illusion that the Black Temple had been ruined for an era. TSK, TSK, TSK. This is the effect of the supreme power of law. Great Sage Acheron walked in it with his hands clasped behind his back. The power of law? Bufang was a little puzzled. The so-called power of law is more powerful than the will of the Great Path. The power of law is the origin of the world, and no one can resist it. Even the Great Sage is like an ant in front of the power of law. Great Sage Acheron sighed with emotion. The law Bufang was lost in thought. To tell you the truth, I'm also very curious about the realm above the Great Sage. I've cultivated for tens of thousands of years, but I've never touched that barrier. I didn't expect that mangy dog to beat me to it. Great Sage Acheron touched his nose. The two of them continued to walk into the depths of the Black Temple. They chatted as they walked so they didn't feel cold. Suddenly, a black shadow suddenly flashed past. Bufang and Great Sage Acheron's eyes narrowed. Great Sage Acheron even reached out his hand. A mighty power rapidly gathered in his palm. Who's there? Get out here right now. Great Sage Acheron opened his mouth and bellowed. Then, the entire black temple flashed with light. A lazy fat black dog was lying on the ground in the distance, yawning non-stop. Lord Go! Mangy dog? Bufang and Great Sage Acheron were startled at the same time. They didn't even notice that there was a creature in the palace. Lord Go slightly raised his eyes, glancing at Great Sage Acheron, then at Bufang. Bufang boy, you're here. Lord Go's gentle and magnetic voice resounded through the entire palace. Bufang nodded. He took out the food box, opened it, and took out the glowing sweet and sour dragon ribs. A rich aroma instantly filled the air. Lord Go's nose twitched and his eyes lit up. You sent a message from 1,000 miles away just to eat this sweet and sour ribs? Why didn't you wait until you broke through? Holding the sweet and sour ribs, Bufang put the food box on the ground and slowly walked toward Lord Go. He walked to Lord Go's side and placed the blue and white porcelain plate on the ground. Then, he sat down on the cold stairs of the Black Temple. Lord Go glanced at Bufang, but didn't say anything. Then, he began to gorge himself on the plate. It was as if he hadn't eaten sweet and sour ribs for a long time and was extremely hungry. Great Sage Acheron looked at Lord Go's table manners and shook his head. But they didn't say anything. The entire palace reverberated with the sound of Lord Dog wolfing down the food on his plate. After a long time, Lord Go finally finished eating. The blue and white porcelain plate was licked clean. Not a single drop of sweet and sour ribs was left. After eating his fill, Lord Go licked his paws with satisfaction, his mouth slightly curling into a smile. Bufang boy's sweet and sour ribs makes this dog feel good, Lord Go said emotionally. Then, Lord Go opened his eyes and met Bufang's gaze. The latter's questioning look made Lord Go narrow his eyes. I haven't eaten sweet and sour ribs for thousands of years. Now that I have it, I'm really touched, Lord Go said, licking his paws. Thousands of years? Great Sage Acheron and Bufang were dumbfounded. Lord Go had just disappeared for a while. How did it become thousands of years? It's a long story. Lord Go doesn't have time to say too much. Moreover, it's going to be a critical moment, so someone needs to guard it. Lord Go said. That's why I asked Bufang boy to come. Otherwise, do you think Lord Go went through so much trouble to send you a message, just to ask you to deliver sweet and sour ribs? Of course, this is also an important reason. Lord Go twitched his nose, as if he was savoring the taste of sweet and sour ribs. If it fails, Lord Go died with the taste of sweet and sour ribs, so he can die without regrets. Chapter 1344. What? Lord Go's words startled both the Great Sage Acheron and Bufang. So pessimistic? This doesn't look like Lord Go at all. Bufang watched as Lord Dog stuck out his tongue and licked the corners of his mouth. He felt more and more that this fat dog simply wanted to eat sweet and sour ribs. Eating a mouthful of sweet and sour ribs before he died was just an excuse to eat sweet and sour ribs. That realm is indeed very dangerous. Be careful. Also, once you start breaking through, those nether prison brats will definitely notice it. If D Ting and Nether Puppeteer Patriarch finish their breakthroughs, we really won't be able to stop them, said the Great Sage Acheron. He knew more things, so he'd better tell Lord Go first. That realm was illusory and ethereal. D Ting and the mangy dog in front of him had touched it, but it was extremely difficult for them to break through it. It was much more difficult than breaking through from the little saint to the Great Sage. There were many difficulties. Of course, the Great Sage Acheron didn't know about them. After all, he was still a little far from that level. Even after eating the fortune flatbread and becoming bald, he was still some distance away from that level. Therefore, he could only talk about it, but he couldn't tell him what to do. It doesn't matter. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Lord Go yawned. There is an array in the former site of the Black Temple, which should be a relic from the last era. The Lord of the Black Temple's Forbidden Land wanted to break through with it, but unfortunately, he died too suddenly, said Lord Go. Lord Dog's nose twitched as he said, that array's power is incredible. It contains the power of time. Back then, Lord Dog recklessly barged into the array. Once I entered the array, 1 day was 1,000 years. 1 day was 1,000 years? Bufang and the great sage Acheron both gasped. Was there such a technique in the world? 1,000 years in a day. So, mangy dog, you've been cultivating in that formation for 1,000 years? The great sage Acheron took a deep breath. He, Acheron, had only lived for tens of thousands of years, and half of that time he had spent grasping grass. Otherwise, his cultivation would be even more terrifying. If he could go back in time, of course, he would still choose to F***ck. It would bring him spiritual joy. However, after hearing the mangy dog's words, the great sage Acheron was also shocked. No wonder this mangy dog was able to touch that level so quickly. With the mangy dog's previous cultivation, it was likely that he would be able to break through if he was given a period of time. 1,000 years in a day would naturally allow him to touch that level. Bufang pondered for a moment. 1 day was 1,000 years, and several days were several thousand years. A formation that could control the flow of time. Could it be the gourmet array time that was left behind by the previous host? Bufang's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but ponder. What he knew now was that the previous host should be a figure from the previous age. It could be seen from the description of the patriarchs of the 9 nether prison clans and Black Demon of the Black Temple. Something major must have happened in the previous age that caused the experts of the 9 nether prison clans to kill the previous host. That was the problem. The patriarchs of the 9 nether prison clans were experts from the netherworld, or were they the 9 followers of the previous host? Perhaps only the previous host and the patriarchs of the 9 nether prison clans knew this. However, that was not what Bufang needed to think about now. Instead, it was the time formation. It turned out that the gourmet array could be used like this? No, after thinking for a while, Bufang fell silent again. He frowned, feeling that things were not as simple as he had imagined. Bufang had experimented with the time array in the heaven and earth farmland. It could indeed control the flow of time, but once a person stepped into the flow of time, he would gradually age as time went by. His physical strength, spirit, and energy would age as if he had spent 1,000 years. However, when Bufang looked at the Lord Go, he didn't have such a side effect. Although the Lord Go had experienced the vicissitudes of 1,000 years, his body was exactly the same as it was 1,000 years ago, and his spirit hadn't declined at all. Even for an expert like the great sage, after spending thousands of years in one go, there would be side effects on the aging of his physical body and spirit. There was no doubt, this array was definitely not as simple as the time array. The atmosphere in the Black Temple suddenly froze. After a long time, the Lord Go broke the silence. Bufang, boy, do you have more sweet and sour ribs? The Lord Go asked again, sticking out his tongue and looking at Bufang. Only when you're full will you have the energy to do something. Bufang looked at the fat on the Lord Go's body, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. He took out the dragon meat and began to cook it. Soon, the aroma filled the entire Black Temple. A bowl of steaming, sparkling sweet and sour ribs was ready. He placed it on a blue and white porcelain plate and handed it to the Lord Go. The Lord Go's fat body shook as he gobbled up the food from the porcelain plate. The great sage Acheron seemed to feel something and sighed. He asked Bufang for 3 blue and white porcelain cups, took out his precious jade jar, and poured 3 cups of wine. The refreshing aroma of wine filled the Black Temple. People who smelled it couldn't help but salivate. Come, since you've chosen to embark on that path, I'll use my precious wine to help you succeed. The great sage Acheron placed a cup of wine in front of the Lord Go, who was gobbling up the food from the porcelain plate, and said with a smile, He also gave Bufang a cup of wine. The colorful wine swirled in the cup, and the aroma of the top-grade Acheron's helplessness seemed to be drifting tens of thousands of miles away. This cup of wine was incomparably mellow. The Lord Go raised his head. His nose seemed to be stained with the juice of the sweet and sour ribs, and the fur around the corners of his mouth was sticky with the juice. The Lord Go sucked, and the wine in the cup went into his mouth. Good wine. The Lord Go grinned, licked his tongue, and gobbled up the food from the porcelain plate again. The cups and plates were a mess. The sweet and sour ribs were finished, and so was the wine. The Lord Go burped and lay on the ground, not wanting to move at all. After resting for a while, the Lord Go turned over and stood up. "You too, follow me," the Lord Go said. Then, he strode forward with his enchanting cat-like step. Before long, he turned left and right in the Black Temple, and came to a different place. It was a secret chamber in the Black Temple. This secret chamber was very secretive, and only a few people in the Black Temple knew about it. Black Demon's death was indeed a grievance. Otherwise, he would have chosen to fight before he died. Bufang and the great sage Acheron followed the fat dog, who was twisting his buttocks and walking cat-like step. They stepped into the secret chamber. Within the secret chamber there was a universe, as if it was a brand new world. There were mountains, water, and a gentle breeze and drizzle. The water in the river was weak. But that was all. There was no vitality here. In the middle of this world, there was a complicated and mysterious array. "Look, that's the array Lord Dog mentioned. Lord Dog has been lying in there for 1,000 years. I haven't eaten sweet and sour ribs for thousands of years. Lord Dog is craving it. The Lord Go really wants to eat it," the Lord Go said. He was still a little scared. He was really afraid that if he stayed here for tens of thousands of years without eating sweet and sour ribs, he would go crazy. Bufang's eyes narrowed as he looked at the huge array. He was a little shocked. The array rotated, emitting a mysterious aura. It was completely detached from this world, as if it didn't belong to this world at all. The great sage Acheron was stunned. This kind of array was completely beyond his imagination. It was like a miracle left by a god. An array that can control time. This is really a magical item. The great sage Acheron couldn't help but stretch out his hand, a little amazed. Bufang sensed the array, and could clearly feel the aura of the time array contained in it. It was like the array engraved on the food box when he obtained it. The aura was the same. The difference was that the array in front of him was not just a time array. There were many different arrays in it. Bufang had never sensed this array before. It should be the remaining array of the gourmet array. However, the combination of the gourmet array could produce such an amazing effect. Bufang also felt something. His eyes lit up as if he could see through the entire array. In the array, Bufang saw several rotating dishes. The dishes were located in each corner of the array. Lord Go and the great sage Acheron couldn't see it, but Bufang could. The 4 dishes were sitting in the 4 corners of the array, flashing and converging as if they had turned into the 4 divine beasts. Dragon, phoenix, turtle, tiger, the 4 divine beasts sat at the 4 corners of the array, maintaining its natural operation. This was the 4 divisions array. Bufang withdrew his gaze, shocked. Bufang was getting more and more curious about the origin of the previous host. The spirit sea in his mind had condensed into the 4 divisions and 2 extremes spirit sea when he was cooking the dishes in the God of Cooking's menu. Bufang thought it was his own creation, but he didn't expect that the previous host had also developed this method. He exhaled softly. Bufang shook some thoughts out of his head. What's the point of thinking so much? I'll deal with it when it comes. After all, I'm just a chef, and what I need to do is cook good dishes. All the battles and maintenance are for the sake of cooking better. All right, Lord Go is going in. Bufang boy, guard the place for Lord Go. Otherwise, Lord Go, I won't be able to eat sweet and sour ribs anymore. Lord Dog said with a smile that wasn't a smile as he swayed his butt and strode like a cat. His gentle and magnetic voice resounded in the void. Then, Lord Dog strutted his cat-like steps, slowly walking toward the center of the array. As soon as he entered the array, the magic array was instantly triggered, and it was activated. Rumble! The light of the time array flickered. The 4 dishes that represented the 4 divisions were the array's sustenance. Bufang stood outside the array with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes were deep as he looked at the scene. The great sage Acheron hugged the jade jar and took a deep breath. Rumble! A moment later, the array rumbled. Dazzling light flowed through it. In the blink of an eye, Lord Go's aura completely disappeared. Bufang and the great sage Acheron exchanged a glance and said nothing. Then, they slowly walked out of the secret chamber. A rumble rang out. The door of the secret chamber was closed. Meanwhile, Bufang and the great sage Acheron came to the palace. They sat cross-legged on the ground. Lord Go naturally had his reasons for asking them to guard the array. In Nether Prison, in the Di Ting clan's territory, a terrible black vortex kept spinning, and a vast amount of energy was rapidly gathering into it. At the edge of the vortex, there were 2 figures standing on the other side. One of them was a thin old man with a sharp look in his eyes that seemed to cut through everything. He was Nether Puppeteer Patriarch. Standing beside Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was Sword Demon Patriarch. Both of them looked at the vortex and felt the terrifying energy within it. Both of them gasped. That realm is indeed supreme. How enviable! Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said. Sword Demon Patriarch carried a sword on his back, but he didn't say a word. Even if he did, he didn't know what to say. That realm was too far away from him. He only knew that it was a supreme realm. Of course, although it was far away from him, he was well aware of how terrifying that realm was. He could still remember that figure that was like a fiend god during the destruction of the previous era. He was fighting a supreme existence from a great world alone. That kind of power could destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth. Unfortunately, that person died in the end. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch flicked a finger on Sword Demon Patriarch's head, bringing him back to his senses. Stop daydreaming. In the battlefield of the stars, I fought with that hell dog. That dog has already stepped into this realm. He should have borrowed some methods from the forbidden areas of hell. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said. Just like how we borrowed the means of the Nether Prison Forbidden Land. Sword Demon Patriarch nodded. However, we can't let him succeed. In the Netherworld, we only need Di Ting to step into that realm. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said. His eyes were cold as he stared at the black vortex with a fanatical look in his eyes. Then, he glanced at Sword Demon Patriarch. With a thought in his mind, immediately, an old gourd appeared in his hand. Take this gourd and go to Earth Prison. You must stop that dog from breaking through. Don't worry. With this gourd, the wine in it is enough to make you stronger than the tyrant body. But remember, don't drink too much. In addition, I'll send you a helper, and he will surprise them. The corner of Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's mouth twitched, and a cold smile emerged on his face. Sword Demon Patriarch grabbed the gourd, his eyes filled with excitement. He naturally knew what the wine in it was. Go! Nether Puppeteer Patriarch waved his hand. Sword Demon Patriarch nodded. With a thought, a silver stream of light emerged. Stepping on the sword, he disappeared in a flash. With his hands clasped behind his back, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch looked at the endless black vortex and sighed softly. Soon, very soon, Buzz, the void behind Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was torn apart. A tall and sturdy figure wrapped in black gas appeared. I've painstakingly pieced you together. You are my proudest masterpiece. It's time for you to let the world know of your existence. Go. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch clasped his hands behind his back and never looked back. The eyes of the figure shrouded in black smoke immediately turned red. The next moment, the void healed, and the figure fled with a rumbling sound. Chapter 1345. Acheron City. In the early morning of the next day, the air was moist and fresh after the rain. The sunlight shone on the sparkling and translucent leaves on the leaves, and they emitted a myriad of resplendent rays of light. It looked quite dazzling and eye-catching. Acheron's little restaurant. There was a long line at the entrance. These people were from aristocratic families. They had moved from their respective cities to this place, so that they could line up and buy the fortune flatbreads in the restaurant as soon as possible. Of course, they had come for the fortune flatbreads at first, but after a while, they were attracted by the delicacies in the restaurant. Therefore, they queued up for the sake of being able to eat delicious dishes. The economy of Acheron City had soared because of a small restaurant. As if they had a tacit understanding, the bustling stalls at night wouldn't open their stalls during the day because they knew that the daytime belonged to that restaurant. But today the line was a little noisy. Usually, the restaurant would be open at this time. The restaurant had rested for a whole day yesterday, but today it still hadn't opened. This made many people feel a little strange. The sounds of discussion resounded endlessly. Some guessed that Owner Boo had slept late. Some guessed that Owner Boo had gone on a long trip. But no matter how they guessed, the restaurant still didn't open. Some people couldn't wait any longer. They turned and left the line that had been waiting for a long time. However, not long after they left, the restaurant's doors were opened. Everyone's spirits rose and they looked over. A graceful figure was standing in front of the door. Yu's black hair hung down, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. "There's no need to wait. We're closed today," Yu said. A series of sighs resounded. The diners in the line all felt a little regretful and unwilling. They thought it was Owner Boo who had opened the door, but they didn't expect to hear such a message after waiting for so long. Nethery was cold, and her words were concise and comprehensive. After saying what needed to be said, she closed the restaurant's doors. She also furrowed her brows, feeling a little puzzled. Where did Bufang go? The Black Temple. A majestic palace sat in the middle of the mountains. The Black Palace was extremely dilapidated, as if it had been silent for tens of thousands of years. In fact, the Black Temple had only been dilapidated for less than half a month. The reason why it was so dilapidated was largely due to the influence of the laws. The power of laws was somewhat similar to a time array. However, it was much more profound than a time array, because the experts of the Black Temple had indeed lived here before this. But because the Lord of the Forbidden Lands had fallen, all the living beings in the Black Hall had been killed, and the Black Hall seemed to have been ruined for tens of thousands of years. It was as if those living beings had never lived in the Black Hall. This was the profundity of the power of the laws. It was as if those people had already fallen 10,000 years ago. Dust covered the ground. Bufang walked slowly with his hands clasped behind his back. Every time he stepped on the ground, dust would rise. The silent Black Temple was like a sleeping beast that had retracted its claws and fangs. Bufang wandered around the Black Temple for a while. He had a clear understanding of every corner of the Black Temple. The Black Temple was huge. 10,000 years ago, it was an unparalleled force. Although it had been destroyed, many things had been left behind. In some secret chambers, Bufang found some books on cultivation technique. Of course, there were also some books that recorded the history of 10,000 years ago. Unfortunately, the history recorded in those books had disappeared after the destruction of the Black Temple. Even the information recorded by later generations had been erased by the power of the laws. So, in fact, there was nothing to gain. But there was a pleasant surprise. Bufang had found a kitchen in the Black Temple. The kitchen of the Black Temple was very large. There was a whole row of stoves in it. This kind of stove was relatively primitive. It was manually ventilated. In the wine cellar of the kitchen, Bufang found some good wine. He took out a jar of wine. He slapped the lid off. A strong aroma of wine immediately wafted out. The wine was not good, but because of the accumulation of time, its quality had been greatly improved. The wine should have been finished a long time ago. However, because of the power of the laws, everything had returned to the second before the Black Temple became a forbidden land 10,000 years ago. Gulp. Bufang poured a glass of wine. The wine was transparent and it tasted rather sweet. As soon as he took a sip, it was extremely spicy, but with a strong aroma of wine, which made him feel comfortable all over. Compared with the top-grade Acheron helplessness, this wine was nothing. But in fact, it was a good wine. It was mainly because of the accumulation of time. Some wines were mellower and more delicious the longer they existed. He took all the wine away. Before long, Bufang came to the Great Hall. In the Great Hall, Great Sage Acheron was curled up on a recliner, holding his jade jar and playing with it happily. When he saw Bufang, his eyes widened. "Where did you find so much wine?" Great Sage Acheron sucked in a breath of cold air. Looking at Bufang, who seemed to have moved an entire wine cellar over, he was instantly amazed. In fact, Bufang had indeed emptied an entire wine cellar. "Want a jar?" Bufang glanced at Great Sage Acheron and threw him a jar of wine. Great Sage Acheron took the wine and snorted, not caring at all. "How can this ordinary wine compare to my little green?" Bufang did not bother to pay attention to him. He took out the White Tiger Heaven stove. With wine, he naturally needed dishes to go with it. Bufang had some experience in making dishes that went with wine. Swish. He lit the stove and poured water into the pot. He let the water in the pot boil slowly. On the other side, Bufang began to prepare the ingredient. He had exchanged for some chicken feet from the system. These chicken feet were not big, around medium size. If they were too big, it would be difficult to absorb the flavor. If they were too small, it would be boring to chew. This kind of medium chicken feet was just right. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in his hand, and a dazzling golden light seemed to shoot out, dazzling and eye-catching. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Bufang's knife speed was extremely fast, reaching a level of familiarity. It should be the so-called practice makes perfect. The knife light flashed, and each of the sharp claws was cut off. Then, he poured them into a wooden basin and began to wash them. This cleaning process was also very skillful. He poured spirit vinegar into the water, and a sour smell filled the air. Great Sage Acheron couldn't help but twitch his nose. Then, Bufang began to rub and wash these chicken feet. These chicken feet were the claws of a high-grade spirit beast. After being soaked in spirit vinegar and washed, as well as being rubbed by Bufang, some of the impurities on them would be eliminated, and they would have the effect of removing the bones. After blanching, they were all drained and placed flat, waiting to be braised. After that, what Bufang needed to do next was to make the braised soup. The braised soup was the essence of this dish, and it was also the most important part of this dish. He cut off a big piece of rhino meat. Speaking of this piece of meat, there was something special about it. This was something that Great Sage Acheron had picked up in the battlefield of the stars. Brewing a braised soup was also a rather unique skill. First, he had to prepare the broth, which was made of rhino meat. After the broth was the medicinal broth. The medicinal broth was made of 18 kinds of precious spirit herbs, which gave the broth a golden brown color. To make the braised soup, first, he had to prepare the broth, pour the medicinal broth into it, and put the rhino meat into the broth to condense the oil next. He had to make the fragrance. To Bufang, it was a piece of cake to control the fragrance. He had a good understanding of spices, so after adding the spices, he added the exploding flame pepper, sun mother ginger, and so on. Soon, the braised soup was ready. Rumble, the steaming stew was boiling, and the aroma was constantly surging. It was a kind of medicinal fragrance which was very tempting. She looked at the gurgling stew. After that, Bufang poured the processed chicken feet into the bowl. It turned from a big fire to a small one, mainly because when the fire boiled, the skin of the chicken feet would burst, which would affect the beauty and taste. Controlling the temperature was also a skill. Next, during the braising process, Bufang took out all kinds of ingredients and added them. Star anise spirit, sun mother ginger, flame pepper, and so on. They were all added to boil. There were also some spices and so on. As it boiled, the soup became viscous, and the chicken feet rolled around in it. The originally white chicken feet slowly turned into a brown color after being boiled. They looked quite appetizing. They seemed to be covered with a layer of sugar juice, overflowing with light and color. Rumble, the broth was drained. Bufang took all the chicken feet out of the pot, placing them on a blue and white porcelain plate. The chicken feet were stacked together, exuding a strong aroma. The skin and flesh of the chicken feet were full of elasticity, looking quite bright. The great sage Acheron was stunned. Smelling the aroma, he felt a pang of hunger in his stomach. Those claws! Looking at them, his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Bufang, my little friend, what is this dish? Is this the dish that goes well with wine you mentioned? The great sage Acheron wiped his mouth. He couldn't wait any longer. It was chicken feet cooked with the broth of rhinoceros meat. That piece of rhinoceros meat was the meat of the 9 Revolution great sage. It was definitely extraordinary. This kind of delicacy, just thinking about it, made people excited. Bufang sat on a chair. Opening the lid of a jar of wine, he glanced at the great sage Acheron, the corners of his mouth twitching. Bufang didn't say anything. He grabbed a chicken foot and bit it. The elastic chicken foot entered his mouth with a crunch. The bones of the chicken feet weren't very hard, so they were broken with a single bite. The tendons of the chicken feet were connected to the bones, so it was very chewy when he took it off. After a piece of chicken foot entered his stomach, he took a big gulp of wine. The mellow wine and the delicious chicken feet made him the envy of others. This chicken foot is called Hong Se chicken feet. Chicken feet and wine are a perfect match, Bufang said. Then, he continued to eat the chicken feet and drink the wine. The great sage Acheron couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed a chicken foot and started to chew. He didn't even need to spit out the bones. With a crunch, he chewed and swallowed the bones. Then, he took a big gulp of wine and clicked his tongue. It was refreshing to watch. The two of them held the jar of wine, surrounding the chicken feet, and began to eat. The ground was covered with chicken bones and empty wine jars. If the Lord Go knew that the two of them were living a happy life, he was afraid that he would suffer a cultivation deviation in the next second. He called you here to protect me, not to let you go camping. Of course, at this moment, the Lord Go didn't know that. And Bufang and the others didn't have that kind of awareness either. Crunch, gulp, gulp. The sound of people crunching chicken bones and drinking wine echoed in the silent hall. From time to time, the great sage Acheron would burp. The earth prison sky was suddenly torn apart. A silver sword light whizzed past, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Rumble! A terrifying pressure spread out. Then, it hovered in the sky. On the silver sword light, a gray-robed old man stood with his hands clasped behind his back. There was a bottle gourd hanging from the old man's waist. The bottle gourd looked old and worn. However, this gourd was the source of his confidence. Tyrant Patriarch was killed by Bufang. How could he continue to court death ignorantly? Without this gourd, unless Nether Puppeteer Patriarch did it himself, he wouldn't come to court death again. But with this gourd, things were different. This gourd was left behind by that man Buzz. As it sped, soon Sword Demon Patriarch saw the majestic Black Temple. There seemed to be an invisible vortex spinning above the Black Temple. Nether Puppeteer was right. That dog is really breaking through. Sword Demon Patriarch narrowed his eyes. The next moment, he hovered in midair, his eyes narrowed. Passing through the halls, he looked straight at Bufang and the great sage Acheron, who were drinking wine and eating chicken feet. Oh? Sure enough, someone is guarding them. When Sword Demon saw Bufang and thought of Tyrant Patriarch, who was killed by Bufang, he couldn't help but shudder. Then, he grabbed the gourd and shook it. The sound of juices colliding rang out. Holding the gourd, he removed the stopper. After removing the stopper of the gourd, a drop of crimson liquid immediately floated out of the gourd. I can finally drink the heaven-defying fortune wine. A hint of desire emerged in Sword Demon Patriarch's eyes. Then, with a flick of his finger, the crimson liquid slipped into his mouth. A rich aroma exploded in an instant. Rumble! A terrible aura spread in the sky. Bufang and the great sage Acheron, who were drinking wine and eating chicken feet, froze and looked up at the sky. Their eyes fell on Sword Demon Patriarch, who was stepping on a sword light. Chapter 1346. Sword Demon Patriarch. Bufang and Acheron great sage froze when they saw the figure in the sky stepping on a sword. A half-bitten chicken claw was stuffed in Acheron great sage's mouth, and 3 of the chicken claws were still exposed, twitching as Acheron great sage moved his mouth. "He's here so soon?" Great sage Acheron said in surprise. Obviously, he didn't expect Sword Demon Patriarch to come so fast. He didn't expect Nether Prison to move so fast. Of course, what was even more surprising was that it was just Sword Demon Patriarch. Even Tyrant Patriarch was killed, so how could a mere Sword Demon Patriarch stop them? Great Sage Acheron and Bufang exchanged a glance and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Rumble! In the sky, Sword Demon Patriarch's aura suddenly exploded after drinking a drop of crimson wine. The blood in his body seemed to be boiling. The heaven-defying fortune wine was that man's masterpiece. A drop of it could steal the fortune of heaven and earth. It could elevate his cultivation base to a very terrifying level. Buzz, as soon as the drop of wine entered his stomach, Sword Demon Patriarch's body seemed to swell. He flicked his finger. Suddenly, a beam of sword light shot toward the black temple below like it was flying. He wanted to destroy the black temple. A terrifying speed swept across heaven and earth, filling the air with a deafening sonic boom. The sound of the sonic boom made everyone's scalp go numb. Crack! Great Sage Acheron bit the chicken claw in half. Then, he took a step and soared into the sky. Bufang, my little friend, leave me a few chicken claws. I'll be back soon. Great Sage Acheron burst out laughing. Then, he sped up into the sky. His face froze when he saw Sword Demon Patriarch shoot out a sword light with a flick of his finger. Great Sage Acheron's body was surrounded by the water of Acheron. He chewed on a chicken claw. Boom! The water of Acheron seemed to have turned into a waterfall that flowed in reverse and collided with the sword light, resulting in an earth-shattering explosion. Rumbling sounds rang out incessantly. Voila! The sword light kept slicing and actually managed to cut the water of Acheron into 2. How is this possible? Great Sage Acheron was slightly taken aback by the power of Sword Demon Patriarch's sword. He knew very well that Sword Demon Patriarch was much weaker than Tyrant Patriarch. It should be impossible for him to destroy his water of Acheron with a single strike. However, he was extremely puzzled by the scene that had just unfolded. Something was wrong. However, it was impossible for the Great Sage Acheron to lose just like that. After all, he was an old man who had lived for tens of thousands of years. Boom! He reached out a palm, and the water in his palm turned into a whirlpool that sucked in the sword light. The strangling force of the sword was completely neutralized by the whirlpool. Then, he clenched his fist. A crack rang out. The sword energy was crushed in an instant. Great Sage Acheron grinned. With a few crunches, the chicken feet in his mouth were completely crushed into powder. In the sky, looking at Great Sage Acheron, Sword Demon Patriarch grinned. He carefully stuffed the broken gourd back into his hand, then put it away. Then, he turned to Bufang. His eyes suddenly turned sharp. The silver sword light around his feet shone brightly in an instant, and it grew larger and larger. Boom! The void seemed to crack under the impact. In a flash, Sword Demon Patriarch appeared in front of Great Sage Acheron. He raised his hand and waved it. Endless sword light, wrapped in power, poured down toward Great Sage Acheron. Great Sage Acheron was taken aback. With a thought, the water turned into a water prison around him. Boom! 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 The sword chi smashed onto the water prison, as if it was going to break it. Great Sage Acheron took a few steps back in the sky. "How can you be so strong?" Great Sage Acheron said incredulously as he looked at Sword Demon Patriarch, who was surrounded by endless sword light. In the past, Sword Demon Patriarch was a little weaker than Great Sage Acheron, but now, he seemed to have reached the level of the Great Sage, who had perfected the tyrant body. Every move and skill seemed to contain infinite power. As it poured down, it seemed as if it wanted to blast people into dregs. "So, this is the feeling of power." Sword Demon Patriarch was extremely excited. He raised his hand and felt the energy flowing through his body. The energy had made him reach a level that he had never imagined before. He clenched his fist. Immediately, endless sword light swirled around him. His sword intent and sword chi had both been strengthened. This was the effect of the heaven-defying fortune wine. One drop of the wine had made him step into the Great Sage realm, and he could now unleash an incomparably powerful sword light. Although he was strong in the past, he was only a 9-revolution Great Sage. But now, he seemed to have made a qualitative leap. He could hardly suppress the excitement on his face. Sword Demon Patriarch looked at Great Sage Acheron and pinched his fingers together. The next moment, a sword light shot out like a thunderbolt. Boom! Great Sage Acheron was only a few centimeters away from Acheron. The sword light tore through the air and cut off a few hairs of Great Sage Acheron. "Why is he so violent?" Great Sage Acheron glared at Sword Demon Patriarch. He was infuriated. In the Black Temple, Bufang sat in a chair, munching on a chicken claw in his hand as he watched the battle in the sky. It was a little strange that Sword Demon Patriarch was suppressing Great Sage Acheron with his explosive strength. Looking at Great Sage Acheron, Bufang kept retreating, feeling wronged. Even Bufang couldn't stand it anymore. "Big Yellow, have some biscuits." Bufang took a sip of wine and called out, "Biscuits?" Great Sage Acheron glared at Bufang. When he thought that he would become bald again after eating the biscuits, he quickly shook his head and refused. "It's impossible for me to eat biscuits. Not in this lifetime." Great Sage Acheron was very determined. Bufang helplessly shrugged his shoulders when he saw his resolute expression. Boom! Thousands of swords gathered and turned into a sword light that seemed capable of cutting heaven and earth. The sword light fell with a rumble, shattering everything in its path. Even the void began to crumble under its might. The returning sword. Sword Demon Patriarch burst out laughing. Looking at Great Sage Acheron, who was being crushed by him, he felt very happy. The fluctuations of the battle spread in an instant. It was a battle between a 9-revolution Great Sage and a Great Sage of the Great Sage realm. Naturally, the fluctuations were extraordinary. In Earth Prison, many experts sensed the fluctuations. Then, many experts rushed toward the location where the fluctuations of the battle occurred. Many people sucked in a cold breath. The 9-revolution Great Sage didn't fight in the battlefield of the stars but chose to fight on the ground. Did he not care about the rules? Hades' Era's hair fluttered in the wind, and the front of his robe was unbuttoned. His eyes narrowed. He looked in the direction of the Black Temple. With a stomp of his foot, he turned into a beam of light and shot into the sky, flying toward the old site of the Black Temple. Only Sword Demon Patriarch of Nether Prison could have such a mighty sword energy. How dare he act so presumptuously in Earth Prison? Not only Hades' Era, but Inglong, Earth Prison Overlord, and other experts also sped toward the Black Temple. In the cave of the fallen gods, a blood-colored ghostly fire was burning. The golden skeleton let out a sigh, then fell silent again. The fluctuations of the battle continued to break out. The experts who were closer to the old site of the Black Temple arrived in no time. When they arrived and saw the scene in the sky, they all sucked in cold breaths in disbelief. Great Sage Acheron was being suppressed by Sword Demon Patriarch. In the sky, Great Sage Acheron's body was covered with sword marks, and blood was seeping out of them. When did Sword Demon Patriarch become so strong? Boom! A figure fell from the sky at high speed. With a loud rumble, he smashed into the ground, causing the whole ground to cave in. The ground caved in deeply and cracks spread out densely. The black hall trembled several times because of the rumble. "I don't want to waste my time with you. Next, I'll finish you with one move." Sword Demon Patriarch slowly unsheathed the sword on his back. It was an azure blue sword, and he looked at it. Buzz, with just a gentle wave of the sword, a deafening sword cry resounded. Swoosh, in the soil, Great Sage Acheron climbed out of it. He looked a little embarrassed at the moment. Sword Demon Patriarch was high and mighty, and he no longer took Great Sage Acheron seriously. "I'll kill you with one move." 10,000 swords returned to origin. Sword Demon Patriarch shouted. The next moment, the sword in his hand slashed down toward Great Sage Acheron. Boom! 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 One sword beam after another shot out of the sword in Sword Demon Patriarch's hand, turning into thousands upon thousands of sword beams. They fell from the sky. "You forced me to do this." Great Sage Acheron flew into a rage. Being looked down upon made him even more furious. Sword Demon Patriarch, whom he had suppressed many years ago, wanted to kill him. It seemed that he was going to force him to use his ultimate move. Crack! The steaming fortune flatbread appeared in his hand, and he bit it hard. Immediately, the fortune gas in the flatbread surged into Great Sage Acheron's body. Buzz in the sky. The gourd on Sword Demon Patriarch's waist trembled slightly the moment the fortune flatbread appeared. It was as if they sensed each other. Buzz, as soon as the flatbread entered his stomach, Great Sage Acheron felt a fortune explode inside him. He opened his mouth, and his nostrils flared. Then, he spat out a fireball as if hinting at something. A gust of wind blew past. Great Sage Acheron's clothes fluttered in the wind. On top of his head, strands of hair began to fall off, fluttering in the wind. Before long, Great Sage Acheron's bald head was the only thing left. Great Sage Acheron touched his bald head with a deep look in his eyes. He looked at the countless swords that were slashing down from the sky. Then, he slowly raised his fist and threw out a punch. Boom! 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 One beam of sword energy after another slashed down and scrupulously, swallowing Great Sage Acheron in an instant. The Black Temple shook violently. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. "Didn't you say you would never eat flatbread in your life? Where's your integrity?" Bufang took a sip of wine. Sword Demon Patriarch stood calmly in the sky with his sword in hand. At this moment, he felt like a banished immortal. Suddenly the ground exploded. Yellow Spring Great Sage, who was engulfed by the sword energy of his myriad returning to origin swords, rushed up in a flash. Explosions rang out. Rumbling filled the air. Great Sage Acheron strode up and threw a punch at Sword Demon Patriarch's head. Boom! A sword and a fist collided together. Both of them took a few steps back in midair. They were evenly matched. The bald Great Sage Acheron was so strong. The surrounding spectators were all dumbfounded. The number of spectators this time was much more than the number of spectators in the previous star battlefield. After all, there were too many restrictions in the battlefield. This time, everyone in Earth Prison would know that Great Sage Acheron was bald. "You're courting death." The sword in Sword Demon Patriarch's hand slashed out beams of light, each of which was extremely sharp. The sky seemed to have turned into a dense sea of sword energy. Great Sage Acheron, on the other hand, kept swinging his fists. Punch after punch. He directly smashed the sword chi into pieces. The destructive power brought about by the battle between Great Sage Nine Revolution was terrifying. The aftershock of their battle caused the ground to crumble completely. Bufang sat in the Black Temple. His hair had turned grayish-green at some point, and he was yawning with tears in his eyes. Beams of green light spread in all directions. The entire Black Temple was shrouded in them. It was as if they were worth 1,000 taels of gold. In the sky, the aftershock of the battle between Sword Demon Patriarch and Great Sage Acheron fell in front of the Black Temple, dispelled, and smashed into the ground around it. The ground around the Black Temple seemed to have been cut, leaving deep ravines. Great Sage Acheron, on the other hand, was standing against the sword light. Finally, he came in front of Sword Demon Patriarch. He stared at Sword Demon Patriarch, his bald head gleaming. "You forced me to eat flatbread and made me bald. You're very strong, aren't you?" Great Sage Acheron glared at him. The next moment, he threw a punch at Sword Demon Patriarch's face. Oh! Sword Demon Patriarch was knocked flying backward for thousands of miles in the sky. He did not seem to stop flying. But finally, a rumble rang out. The void was torn apart. A figure shrouded in black smoke walked out of it. He raised a hand and stopped Sword Demon Patriarch from flying backward. As soon as the figure appeared, heaven and earth fell silent. Chapter 1347. Rumble. His oppressive figure soared through the sky, accompanied by a series of sonic booms. Great Sage Acheron's punch was so powerful that it smashed into Sword Demon Patriarch's face and sent him flying backward. Everyone looked up and cheered excitedly when they saw Sword Demon Patriarch streaking across the sky like a shooting star. However, their cheers soon came to an abrupt halt, because a silhouette stepped out of thin air, surrounded by a majestic black aura. As the black smoke spread, a palm reached out and pressed against Sword Demon Patriarch's body, stopping him from flying backward. Sword Demon Patriarch was a little confused and a little angry. He was a sword cultivator, and although his offense was strong, his physical defense was much weaker. He didn't expect that Great Sage Acheron would be able to get so close to him and punch him in the face. If it weren't for the person behind him, he would have been sent flying even further away. The power of the punch was terrifying. Is this the bald Great Sage Acheron? He had seen Great Sage Acheron's terror before, but now, he felt even more terrified. Is that flatbread really so magical? No. Impossible. How can a mere flatbread compare to the heaven-defying fortune wine? Sword Demon Patriarch seemed to be a little angry out of humiliation. He let out a low growl. With a thought, the gourd hanging on his waist shot up into the sky. Wine seemed to be churning inside the gourd, and it kept churning like a raging wave. A popping sound rang out. The gourd's stopper was pulled open, and a slender stream of crimson wine slithered out like a small snake. It was about to enter Sword Demon Patriarch's mouth. Gulp, gulp. Sword Demon Patriarch drank the wine greedily. He felt as if a ferocious beast was roaring and boiling inside him. He couldn't control his emotions anymore. Suddenly, the gourd was grabbed by a hand, and the black aura dissipated, revealing the appearance of the hand. It was a palm made of pitch-black metal. The joints between the fingers were made with very fine parts. Looking at that palm, Sword Demon Patriarch's pupils constricted. Let go! Sword Demon Patriarch let out a low growl. With his body as the center, a streak of sword light streaked across the air and slashed at the metal palm. He wanted to chop off that metal hand, however, in the face of Sword Demon Patriarch's attack. The Patriarch's eyes widened. The metallic hand simply grabbed the cork of the gourd and stuffed it back in. Ding ding! Sword Demon Patriarch's furious sword strike struck the palm, but it only caused sparks to fly in all directions. Dazzling sparks flew in all directions, stunning Sword Demon Patriarch. After the gourd was put away, his mind gradually calmed down. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Sword Demon Patriarch sucked in a cold breath and glanced at the gourd in horror. He had almost lost his mind just now. Although the heaven-defying fortune wine was powerful, its side effects were as terrible as ever. Once he drank too much and lost control of himself, he could easily fall into madness and suffer a cultivation deviation. Huff, 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 beads of sweat broke out on his forehead, and he took a deep breath, feeling a lingering fear. When he came back to his senses, he also felt as if his body was about to explode. After drinking too much of the heaven-defying fortune wine, the energy in his body was about to burst. However, his strength didn't improve much. Although the heaven-defying fortune wine was heaven-defying, it was already not bad that it could raise his cultivation base to the level of the great sage. If he wanted to reach a higher level, he couldn't just drink wine. That was why Sword Demon Patriarch's body had almost exploded, but it had no effect at all. If it wasn't for someone stopping him, his body would have already exploded from overeating. With that thought in mind, Sword Demon Patriarch couldn't help but look at the figure who had saved him. It was a majestic figure that carried with it a pressure that made his heart tremble. A terrible aura pervaded the air, suppressing him so much that he almost couldn't breathe. Sword Demon Patriarch's pupils constricted. Looking at the figure shrouded in black smoke, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. This should be the person Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said sent to help me. But why does this figure look so familiar? Sword Demon Patriarch narrowed his eyes. Rumble, suddenly, a rumbling sound rang out. The black smoke shrouding the figure dissipated in an instant. Gradually, the figure's appearance appeared in everyone's line of sight. The moment he appeared, everyone was dumbfounded. Everyone sucked in a cold breath, their faces filled with disbelief. Some of them even began to show signs of fear. They never thought that this person would appear in front of them. He was a man who should have died. Buzz, a clanging sound rang out incessantly. It was a burly figure with a huge body. Its body was incomparably huge, and it had a familiar face. However, it was extremely cold and emotionless. Countless pitch-black metal rods were stabbed into his body. 2 thick cylindrical rods made of an unknown material had pierced through his chest from his back. It made him look ferocious. However, none of this was the focus of their attention. Even Sword Demon Patriarch was so frightened that he almost couldn't breathe. Hades Tenzang? Sword Demon Patriarch roared, his eyes filled with horror. Why the F***ck did Hades Tenzang show up again? Not only did he show up in the previous battle, but now he's here as well. Why is he still haunting us like a ghost? If it were Hades Tenzang, Sword Demon Patriarch wouldn't have the confidence to defeat him. After all, this man had left a deep shadow in his heart. Hades Tenzang? Sword Demon Patriarch's roar rang through the skies. Down below, everyone's eyes went wide as they stared incredulously at the figure hovering in the sky. Then, an uproar broke out. As the bald great sage Acheron stared at Hades Tenzang, his eyes went wide. Hades era. Is he F***king eating flatbread again? No. That's not right. Great sage Acheron's pupils constricted. He had sensed a terrible aura from Tiansong's body, and that was the reason why he was shocked. It was hostility. Who is Hades Tenzang? Said the figure shrouded in black smoke, glancing at Sword Demon Patriarch. His face was devoid of emotion, and if one looked closely, one could see fine cracks on his face. There was no doubt that his face had been forcibly stitched together by someone. No. You are not Hades Tenzang. You are Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's Nether Puppet. Suddenly, a look of excitement came into Sword Demon Patriarch's eyes as if he had thought of something. He opened his mouth and let out an incredulous laugh. In the face of this fact, even he could not believe it. For so many years, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch had never shown this trump card of his. It was simply terrifying, a puppet made from Hades Tenzang's body? That was crazy. However, during the great battle, Hades Tenzang's body was completely blown up into countless pieces. Some of the pieces could not be found at all. It was rare that Nether Puppeteer Patriarch had the patience to piece them together bit by bit. I'm not Hades Tenzang. I'm a heavenly nether puppet. The puppet's eyes flashed as he said this. A heavenly nether puppet? Hiss, the conversation between Sword Demon Patriarch and the heavenly nether puppet rang in everyone's ears. When everyone heard this, they were extremely shocked. Someone had collected Hades Tenzang's body and made it into a puppet? Who was it that was so crazy? Hades Tenzang was an expert who had touched that level. How terrifying would a puppet made from his body be? The heavenly nether puppet did not waste time talking to Sword Demon Patriarch. He did not seem to like talking much. The metal hand grabbed the gourd and slowly put it into his stomach. There, his stomach parted, revealing a space. He put the gourd into the space, and his stomach closed up again. The scene made everyone understand that this person was indeed not Hades Tenzang, but a heavenly nether puppet. This is too much. Great Sage Acheron also guessed the whole story. He was even more furious at Nether Puppeteer Patriarch. This behavior was utterly devoid of conscience. Buzz, suddenly Great Sage Acheron shuddered. In the distance, the heaven nether puppet looked at him with an expressionless face, its eyes shining with a crimson light as it scanned his body. The next moment, a rumble rang out. The heavenly nether puppet appeared in front of him, as if he had teleported. Target found. Obliterated. An emotionless, somewhat mechanical voice rang out. Then, the puppet threw a punch at Great Sage Acheron. Great Sage Acheron was furious. He did not dodge, but threw a punch as well, colliding with the heavenly nether puppet's punch. Looking at Hades Tenzang's face, Great Sage Acheron's anger surged. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion broke out in the void. Then, Great Sage Acheron was knocked flying away. He fell from the sky like a cannonball, turning into a shooting star and smashing hard on the ground. The ground exploded. It sank deeply. Waves of energy spread out and bombarded the jade-green barrier. Sitting in the black temple, gray-green-haired Bufang opened his mouth wide and yawned. With just one punch, the bald Great Sage Acheron was sent flying away? This kind of power was really frightening. In the sky, a clanging sound of metal rang out. The heavenly nether puppet raised his arm, aiming at the place where Great Sage Acheron was going to fall. Crack! Crack then, a metal panel on his forearm opened up, revealing several nozzles on it. Boom! Beams of light shot out of the nozzles, blasting toward Great Sage Acheron. Wherever the scarlet ray passed, space would distort as if it was being incinerated. It was very terrifying. Great Sage Acheron naturally did not dare to take such a blow. He slapped the ground with both palms and shot out like a cannonball. He rushed out of the range of the beams. In the sky, the heavenly nether puppet's forearm spun. The nozzles were aimed at Great Sage Acheron. They swept all the way. The ground seemed to be cut in half in an instant. Rubble crumbled and lava seemed to surge out of the ground. It was a terrifying scene. Sword Demon Patriarch, who was hovering in midair, shivered. Looking at the heavenly nether puppet, he sucked in a cold breath. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch is indeed a freak. I can't believe he used Hades Tenzang's corpse to imitate that man's guardian puppet to create such a fearsome existence. This heavenly nether puppet's attacking method is somewhat similar to that man's guardian puppet. Rumble! Great Sage Acheron kept running. He felt a sense of urgency as if his butt was on fire. Suddenly, he stomped the ground. His figure soared into the sky. He appeared in front of the heavenly nether puppet. His fist seemed to flash with golden light. Tian Sung boy. I'm sorry. Great Sage Acheron bellowed. Then, he threw a punch at the puppet's head. A severe warning. his voice resounded through the heavens. Suddenly great sage Acheron felt that time seemed to slow down. His punch suddenly became extremely slow. It moved like a snail toward the heavenly nether puppet's head. The heavenly nether puppet stood motionless. His eyes moved slowly and locked on the puppet's body. This great sage Acheron was shocked. Rumble. A moment later, the heavenly nether puppet's fist smashed into great sage Acheron's face. Once again, the puppet was sent flying from the sky like a cannonball and smashed hard on the ground. His strength was terrifying. The ground was full of holes. It had long been turned into ruins. Only the Black Temple, which was guarded by Bufang, was unshaken. The heavenly nether puppet raised his arm. Another metal plate separated from his forearm. With a click, a nozzle appeared. Target locked. Obliterate. The puppet's cold and emotionless voice rang out. He was just like Hades Tenzang, who had dominated Nether Prison and Earth Prison in the past. All of a sudden, stop! At that moment a shout shook heaven and earth. The sound of something tearing through the air came. A moment later, the heavenly nether puppet slowly raised his head. A black shadow was thrown from a distance, approaching in an instant. Rumble! The arm that had turned into a nozzle returned to its original shape. It lifted up and caught the black shadow. That black shadow was the Hades halberd. Hades' era tore through the air, staring at the heavenly nether puppet in the sky and that familiar face. Chapter 1348. Gray-green-haired Bufang opened his mouth wide and yawned, tears welling up in his eyes. After being possessed by the black turtle, his defense had become invincible. It was not a problem for his defense to spread out and envelop the Black Temple. Bufang, who was curled up in a chair, didn't want to move at all. His eyes were half closed, looking extremely lazy. In the sky, the heavenly nether puppet caught Hades' halberd in an instant, unable to advance or retreat. The heavenly nether puppet was made of Hades Tenzang's corpse. It was incomparably strong. Even if an expert died, his body would still be invincible. Hades Tenzang was the best example. Hades Tenzang's face was a little confused. Looking at the Hades halberd in his hand, his face regained its cold expression. In the distance, Hades' era flew over, his eyes fixed on the heavenly nether puppet's face. Looking at his face, the corners of his mouth kept twitching. "Dad, it's me." Hades' era opened his mouth and called out. However, the only response he got was the heavenly nether puppet's cold eyes. The heavenly nether puppet threw Hades' halberd back. It whistled across the sky, causing the void to shatter. In just a flash, it approached Hades' era's side. Hades' era raised his hand and grabbed Hades' halberd. The huge force made him take several steps back in the void. This heavenly nether puppet was extremely strong, even stronger than the great sage. Hades' era's strength was nothing in front of the heavenly nether puppet. Rumble. The ground was turned over. Great sage Acheron walked out of the ruins. His bald head was shining, and he couldn't believe what he had just seen. He had never thought that this heavenly nether puppet would be so strong. He was indeed the man who had once dominated the nether prison. Even though he had become a puppet, he was still domineering. Touching his bald head, the great sage Acheron exhaled softly. With a boom, he shot up from the ground like a cannonball. Behind the heaven nether puppet, a stream of air slowly spurted out, propelling his body toward Hades' era. A majestic pressure approached Hades' era. Buzz! Suddenly, the heaven nether puppet raised his hand. A clanging sound rang out. On his forearm, the metal panel suddenly floated up, and the nozzle on it began to flicker with a scarlet brilliance. Energy was condensing. There was a loud bang. A ray of light shot toward Hades' era as if it wanted to pierce through Hades' era in an instant. Hades' era was in a daze. It was as if he didn't know how to dodge the ray. Boom! The great sage Acheron had arrived at some point in time. He raised his fist and punched the ray of light. A loud boom rang out. The ray of light contained a terrible power of destruction. It was as if the will of the great path had been compressed into it. The great sage Acheron's fist hit the target. The energy of the ray of light scattered in all directions. The ray of light disappeared. The great sage Acheron panted violently in midair. He raised his hand and looked at his scarlet fist with an incredulous look on his face. The ray of light was too terrible. Crack, crack. The metal panel was put away. The heaven nether puppet twisted his neck, and a terrible and oppressive aura spread. In the distance, the sword demon patriarch burst out laughing, so excited that his whole body was shaking. This scene was simply too interesting. Nether puppeteer patriarch is really evil. I can't believe he has restored Hades Tenzang's body and made him into a puppet. The once invincible existence in Nether prison has now become Earth prison's nightmare. The great sage Acheron was no match for the heaven Nether puppet. Although he was only a puppet, he was stronger than tyrant patriarch. Looking at the scene, the sword demon patriarch was so excited that he wanted to laugh. In midair, the great sage Acheron shook his fist and bared his teeth. The next moment, an oppressive whistle rang out. Then, the heavenly Nether puppet appeared at his side without him noticing, throwing a punch at him. The oppressive explosion made the great sage Acheron's eyes go wide. Boom, boom, boom. The two of them exchanged blows in midair. The heaven Nether puppet's attacks were getting faster and faster. The great sage Acheron could barely keep up with him. Nether King Ha was in a daze for a long time, but he had already come back to his senses. The next moment, a fierce look burst out of his eyes. The fortune flatbread appeared in his hand, and he bit it angrily. With a crunch, the fortune gas rushed into his mouth. Buzz, what he expected did not happen. Hades' era's aura began to soar. It kept climbing, and before long, it reached the realm of the 8th-revolution great sage. He clenched his fist. With the terrible power contained in the lock, and the enhancement of the Hades armor, he could compete with the great sage. Hades' era focused his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curved upward. Dad. I'm sorry. Boom. Grabbing the Hades halberd, Hades' era rushed into the battlefield and fought the heaven Nether puppet with the great sage Acheron. The battle turned white-hot in an instant and heaven and earth dimmed. Rumbling sounds rang out incessantly. Finally, they rushed into the battlefield of the stars. They fought in the starry sky. God Vanishing Mountain, Ice Saint, who was sitting cross-legged on a block of ice that had not melted for 10,000 years, suddenly shook her long eyelashes. Then, she opened her eyes. There seemed to be wind and snow howling in her pupils. A trace of coldness appeared on her beautiful face. She stood up, her white dress fluttering. The tip of her foot touched the ground. Her figure immediately soared into the sky. However, the moment she rushed out of the range of God Vanishing Mountain, an invisible force seemed to lock her body, causing her to furrow her brows. However, she did not care about that. She continued to soar into the sky. The familiar aura emitted from that distant place made her heart throb unceasingly. The experts rushed into the battlefield of the stars. The ground became calm all of a sudden. Sword Demon Patriarch's body was filled with a swelling feeling. Then, his eyes turned and locked on the black temple in the distance. The corners of his mouth rose, revealing a cold smile. Without the bald great sage Acheron, it meant that his chance had come. However, his eyes still focused on Bufang. When he saw Bufang, his heart still palpitated a little. After all, this fellow had killed Tyrant Patriarch with his own hands. Even with the help of the heaven-defying fortune wine, he was not confident. Of course, he believed that with Bufang's 9-revolution Little Saint cultivation base, that level of strength could not be displayed indefinitely. If every 9-revolution Little Saint could be so heaven-defying, what was the use of the great sage? Even that man could not reach this level when he was a 9-revolution Little Saint. In fact, to a large extent, The fortune flatbread depended on one's luck. When Sword Demon Patriarch set his target on the Black Temple, the vortex over the Black Temple began to expand. The radius of the vortex grew larger and larger. It was as if there was a supreme expert swallowing all the energy in the surroundings. That was the dog's breakthrough. He had to stop it. Sword Demon Patriarch focused his eyes. Then, his body floated in front of the Black Temple. Buzz, his mind flickered. A sword hovered around him. His divine will spread, and the sword turned into countless swords. 1, 2, 3, they were so numerous that they blotted out the sky. They faced the huge Black Temple below. As long as the Black Temple was destroyed, the dog's mind would be shaken, and it would be very difficult for him to break through. The corners of Sword Demon Patriarch's mouth curved upward. Then, his divine will flickered. Rumble! Tens of thousands of sword lights whizzed down, as if they had turned into a long river. They swept up tens of thousands of waves that rumbled endlessly as they bombarded the Black Hall. Every beam of sword light contained terrifying destructive power. They caused the void to tremble. Break! Sword Demon Patriarch roared furiously. His expression became somewhat ferocious, and all his anger was vented at this moment. The Black Temple. The gray-green-haired Bufang opened his mouth and yawned again. If Sword Demon Patriarch hadn't launched an attack, he would have fallen asleep. After drinking the heaven-defying fortune wine, Sword Demon Patriarch's strength had reached the realm of the Great Sage. He was very strong. Therefore, even though Bufang was possessed by the Black Turtle, he didn't dare to be careless. Lazily taking out a piece of flatbread, gray-green-haired Bufang smacked his lip. As an artifact spirit, his luck can't be too bad. Gray-green-haired Bufang murmured as if to comfort himself. Then, he opened his mouth and unhurriedly stuffed the biscuit into his mouth. The way he slowly ate the biscuit caused many people to become extremely anxious. "Brother, you're in such a hurry. Can you not eat the flatbread like a lady?" In the distance, many people looked anxious. In their eyes in the sky, tens of thousands of sword chi pressed down towards the Black Hall, as if they were going to destroy the Black Hall in an instant. However, after eating the flatbread, gray-green-haired Bufang's eyes were still half open, and he seemed to be in a daze. Then, he slightly widened his eyes. His cultivation base didn't skyrocket like the white tiger did after eating the flatbread. However, his divine will was much stronger than before. Suddenly, a green, transparent shield appeared around the Black Temple. It seemed to have turned into a turtle shell. Who said that artifact spirits have good luck? Gray-green-haired Bufang shook his head helplessly. But he was optimistic. Perhaps this was the legendary Buddha-type artifact spirit. He was optimistic. Even if his strength didn't improve, his defense had skyrocketed. The fortune gas of the fortune flatbread had gone to his defense. Boom! 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 The sword chi smashed down, bombarding the green tortoise shell light shield. Rumbling filled the air, and the shield shook violently as if it would crack at any moment. However, it was blocked by a hair's breadth. Tens of thousands of swords were blocked in the sky. Sword Demon Patriarch was a little confused. The green turtle shell cracked slightly. Then, a huge pit was revealed. The figure in the Black Temple was exposed. Gray-green-haired Bufang stood up, clasped his hands behind his back, and slowly paced in the great hall. Then, he seemed to think of something. There was a flash of light. A chubby little who appeared in his arms. The little fox blinked its eyes. Its body was fleshy as it grew horizontally, and 3 tails were wagging behind its buttock. The little host said that you've eaten too much, and you need to move around a little. The little host said that you're too fat. Gray-green-haired Bufang stroked Little Who's head. Then, he took out a fortune flatbread and handed it to Little Who. Little Who's eyes lit up. Holding the flatbread in both hands, he began to gorge himself. He finished the whole flatbread in an instant at a speed visible to the naked eye. When he was done, He patted his round belly and widened his eyes. The fortune gas exploded. Little Hu's eyes widened. Its cheeks immediately puffed up, as if something terrible was brewing. Gray-green-haired Bufang opened his eyes and yawned. Holding Little Hu in his arms, he stroked Little Hu's head, then raised his hand and gently patted Little Hu's butt. Little Host said, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, Little Hu's eyes seemed to have thousands of lights swirling in them. His mouth opened wide in the sky. Hades' Era wielded his halberd and fought the heavenly nether puppet with the great sage Acheron. The heavenly nether puppet fought with ease and blocked almost all the moves of the two. His body was still intact. The heavenly nether puppet made from Hades' Tenzang's body was indeed powerful. Suddenly, a whistling sound rang out in the sky. A peerless figure stepped up into the sky, her white dress fluttering in the wind. Her white dress fluttered in the wind as a hint of melancholy appeared on her beautiful face. As soon as Ice Saint entered the battlefield of the stars, she saw the three figures fighting in the distance. She saw the heavenly nether puppet and Hades' Tenzang. Then, she saw the heavenly nether puppet covered in cold metal. In an instant, she understood a lot. It was as if a ball of fire had exploded in her chest. Anger kept rising in her. She was filled with killing intent for what nether puppeteer patriarch had done. She knew that she might not be strong enough. However, she would not allow anyone to insult that man like this. With a flip of her hand, she produced a steaming fortune flatbread. For that man, even if she had to go bald, she would fight. However, when she bit into the flatbread, the bald head she had imagined did not appear. Instead, a frightening aura was continuously gathering behind him. Chapter 1349. A mighty and familiar aura erupted from behind Ice Saint. Ice Saint's pupils constricted slightly. She chewed the fortune flatbread and felt the rich aroma explode in her mouth. She had seen great sage Acheron become bald after eating it, so she had always refused to eat flatbread. But this time, she couldn't refuse it. Tian Tsang's body had been made into a puppet, which was unforgivable to him. That was why she was angry and irritable. So, she ate the flatbread at all costs in order to get some justice for Tian Tsang. Tian Tsang was dead, and these nether prison fellows couldn't insult him. Tian Tsang wasn't someone they could insult. Boom! A surging aura erupted again. A terrible aura swept out as if to break through the starry sky. Ice Saint hovered in midair in a daze. Her long black hair waved in the starry sky, and so did her long dress. Behind her, a familiar aura emerged. Ice Saint slowly turned her neck and looked over with disbelief in her eyes. The fortune flatbread hadn't improved her cultivation base much. Unlike great sage Acheron, she was a little disappointed at first. However, as the aura erupted behind her, she slowly turned her head, and a familiar figure with his eyes closed appeared in her field of vision. She raised a hand in horror and covered her mouth. You! Ice Saint didn't expect that the fortune flatbread could allow her to summon Tian Tsang. However, when she came to her senses, she was a little annoyed. Tian Tsang's appearance seemed to be because Hades' Era had eaten the fortune flatbread. Why didn't she try it? Perhaps it was because she and Hades' Era missed each other so much that they summoned him? His body was burly, and his hair was somewhat illusory, waving in the wind. His handsome face, which looked as if it had been carved by a knife, exuded an air of vicissitudes. Genes could be inherited. Since Hades' Era was so handsome, Hades' Tenzang was not ugly. Buzz, Hades' Tenzang slowly opened his eyes. It was as if the world was spinning in his eyes. He was a little confused, but his eyes gradually lit up. Tian Tsang opened his eyes and saw Ice Saint with tears in her eyes. Then, he paused for a moment. "I've been summoned by you again?" The corner of Tian Tsang's mouth twitched. This time, he was much calmer, and there seemed to be air flowing in his eyes. Ice Saint's long eyelashes quivered. Tian Tsang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was it fun to summon them here and there? However, he was also a little touched. He didn't know what he needed to do to summon him, but he was very clear that he had to have a huge obsession in his heart. This meant that there were still people in this world who remembered him. The corner of Tian-sang's mouth twitched. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked into the distance. This was the Star Wars battlefield, and the atmosphere was somewhat stifling and gloomy. The stars in the starry sky revolved. He cast his gaze into the distance and saw several figures fighting in the distance. Instantly, his pupils constricted. Hades' era was fighting madly. This time, he was not very lucky. The Fortune Gas had only raised his cultivation base to the level of the 8 Revolution Great Sage, and with the help of Hades' armor, he had barely reached the level of the 9 Revolution Great Sage. This level was too weak to face the heavenly nether puppet. If it weren't for Great Sage Acheron, who was desperately holding the puppet, he would have been seriously injured. The materials used to make the heavenly nether puppet were the top materials in the netherworld, and they had reached the peak in hardness, strength, and energy conductivity. It was the pride of Nether Puppeteer Patriarch, his masterpiece. Rumble. Great Sage Acheron's aura began to decline. Although he had once again reached the level of the Great Sage with the Fortune Flatbread, he already felt a little weak. The second time was faster than the first. Great Sage Acheron was a little flustered. If he couldn't stop the heavenly nether puppet, once it ruined Earth Prison Dog's breakthrough, there would be no one in Earth Prison who could stop Nether Prison. Therefore, while the effect of the Fortune Flatbread was still in effect, he had to finish the battle quickly. He had killed the heavenly nether puppet with one punch. Roar. A long roar rang out. Great Sage Acheron's bald head seemed to glow. Over his head, a surging Acheron River emerged. The Acheron River poured down rapidly and swirled around him, causing his aura to rise steadily. He gathered his fist. It was compressed into his fist. Surprisingly, the surging Acheron River was compressed rapidly and turned into a square crystal. Bufang roared. Great Sage Acheron threw a punch straight at the heavenly nether puppet in the distance. He pushed the crystal toward it. The heavenly nether puppet twisted his neck. The face that belonged to Hades Tenzang was cold and emotionless. There seemed to be light bursting out of his eyes. The heavenly nether puppet raised his hand. He threw a punch at the crystal. Boom! They collided. Ripples of energy spread out, and the whole battlefield of the stars seemed to be swept up and tossed. Great Sage Acheron coughed up blood and flew backward. His body was like a cannonball as he was sent flying, crashing down from the sky. However, just as he was knocked away, Great Sage Acheron looked at the figure walking through the sky with a dumbfounded face. What's going on? Great Sage Acheron glanced at the heavenly nether puppet, then at Tian-sang. He felt a little confused. Before he could figure out what was going on, he smashed into the clouds with a rumble. Then, he smashed into the ground. There was a loud explosion. It smashed heavily into the infernal realm. The whole area seemed to have caved in, as if a meteorite had created a huge pit. Everything within thousands of meters was sunken. Only green smoke continued to rise from the center of the deep pit. In the battlefield of the stars, the smoke and dust dispersed. The ripples of energy disappeared. The heavenly nether puppet withdrew his fist. His metal arm seemed to be glowing with a cold light. The heavenly nether puppet, which Nether Puppeteer Patriarch had spent thousands of years to make, was even tougher than tyrant patriarchs. Coupled with Hades Tenzang's flesh, which was boiling with energy, he was naturally invincible. Hades' era gasped for breath. His hair was disheveled, and he looked a little flustered. Suddenly, he jerked his head to look into the distance. Over there, a figure stepped on the air and slowly walked over. Hades' era froze when he saw the figure. Dad! Hades' era froze. He looked at the burly Tian-sang, who was walking in the air, and then at the heavenly nether puppet in the distance. For a moment, he was a little confused. We meet again. What a coincidence. Tian Song glanced at Hades' Era and grinned. Hades' Era reacted immediately, and his eyes sparkled with excitement. Had his dad been summoned again? Who had summoned him? Erha looked at Ice Saint in the distance, and he immediately understood what was going on. Now that he understood, he was extremely excited. However, he seemed to think of something, and his face changed. Hades Tenzang looked indifferently at the heavenly nether puppet. What an exquisite work of art! He had made his own body into a puppet, nether puppeteer. Damn it! The corner of Tian Song's mouth twitched. Looking at the heavenly nether puppet's face, he exhaled deeply. He had a strange feeling in his heart. The heavenly nether puppet cocked his head, his eyes flashing with a mechanical light. Looking at Hades Tenzang, he didn't know if he should attack or what. I'm afraid Nether Puppeteer Patriarch never thought that I would show up again. Otherwise, that old fellow wouldn't have made my body into a puppet. The corner of Hades Tenzang's mouth twitched slightly. He stomped his foot, and the starry sky trembled. The next moment, Tian Song was close to the heavenly nether puppet. Facing the puppet, he slowly pointed a finger. His mechanical eyes flashed. The puppet sensed Tian Song's emotions. Then, the metal plate on his arm opened. He raised his hand and a crimson ray shot out. However, Tian Song's body twisted, and he easily dodged the attack. No matter how Nether Puppeteer Patriarch refines me, my mark will always exist in my body, and ordinary people can't erase it. Hades Tenzang kept pointing his finger. The heavenly nether puppet seemed to feel uneasy. Rumble! Clanging sounds rang out incessantly. The puppet's body changed dramatically in an instant. Arms, chest, palms, thighs, calves, every part of his body was opened by a metal plate, and crimson rays were gathering in them. A rumbling sound rang out. Then, one light beam after another shot toward Tian Song at high speed. Those streaks of flowing light. They seemed to turn into a river of stars that flashed in the sky. They were dazzling and eye-catching. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. It was like a blooming firework, but every firework contained a fatal killing intent. A wisp of firework could probably kill a great sage in an instant. Ice Saint and Hades Era moved in a flash and hid in the distance. As they watched the rays shooting through the starry sky, they felt a chill in their hearts. They had to admit that the heavenly nether puppet was too strong. However, he had met his only nemesis. That nemesis was Hades Tenzang. After all, the heavenly nether puppet's main material was Hades Tenzang's fleshly body, at Hades Tenzang's level, not to mention the imprints of the laws in his fleshly body, the will of the great path he had condensed to become the great sage was already indelible. Hades Tenzang had absolute control over it. He dodged the thousands of rays. Hades Tenzang pointed his finger at the puppet's forehead. Buzz, then, countless metal plates fell silent and healed. His mechanical eyes kept flashing. Buzz, Hades Tenzang's body flowed like water, slowly merging with the heavenly nether puppet's body. In the starry sky, Ice Saint and Hades Era gawked and dropped their jaws. There was such a thing? Does this mean Dad can use this puppet's body to come back to life? Hades Era was bewildered. Then, he asked in surprise. It's possible. Ice Saint's eyes flashed, and she nodded. Was the man who had shaken the heavens and made Nether Prison tremble really coming back? Rumble. In the starry sky, as soon as Tian Song entered the heavenly nether puppet's body, the heavenly nether puppet's body shook unceasingly. His mechanical eyes kept flashing as if his emotions were exploding. His body was twisting strangely. After a long time, the mechanical light in the puppet's eyes disappeared. When he opened them again, they were filled with a domineering look. Crack! Crack! The puppet clenched his fist. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. To my surprise, this puppet's fleshly body is not bad, he said. Although his voice was a little strange, it was not as emotionless as before. In Nether Prison, in the D Ting clan's territory, sitting cross-legged on a black rock, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch snapped open his eyes. Lightning seemed to shoot out of them. How is this possible? How could the heavenly Nether Puppet's spiritual imprint become so weak? Nether Puppeteer Patriarch rose to his feet, and a terrible aura exploded out of him. He glanced at the huge black vortex in the distance. Then, he took a deep breath. Then, he tore the sky apart. Who the hell is trying to erase the spiritual imprint I left in the heavenly Nether Puppet? This spiritual imprint was refined by me with the most talented disciple in my clan. How could it be erased so easily? The void cracked. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch clasped his hands behind his back and stepped into it with a dark face. The void healed. It meant that the storm was about to begin. Chapter 1350. He gently patted it. It was furry, meaty, bouncy, and warm. Gray-green-haired Bufang enjoyed the feeling. He gently patted Little Who's buttocks. Little Who's 3 tails wagged. His eyes widened. There seemed to be a great terror brewing in his mouth, which kept swelling. Took about 2 or 3 seconds to brew. Then, Little Who opened his mouth. Golden light continued to gather in his mouth. Boom! A deafening rumble rang out, followed by a deafening explosion. Waves of air swirled. All of Foxy's fat began to jiggle at this moment, and the white fur on its body began to flutter behind it like grass. The energy that shot out of his mouth rapidly shot toward the distant sky. Rumble! It was a gigantic energy sphere. It was about 8 meters in diameter. As it shot out, countless strands of energy swirled around it, giving off a constant sizzling sound. The tremendous recoil made Little Who's neck shrink back. Gray-green-haired Bufang also took a small step back. His half-closed eyes widened. Obviously, he was stunned. What did Little Who spit out after eating the fortune flatbread? Did he change from a Gatling gun to an 8-meter howitzer? In his spirit sea, the corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Rumble! A huge energy ball shot out like a shooting star. It was extremely fast. It rushed out of the rainproof shield. The thousands of sword lights slashed at the turtle shell, but they kept splashing, making the shell extremely bright and dazzling. The sword lights blurred the eyes of the sword demon patriarch in the sky. However, he only heard a deafening boom. It sounded like the wrath of the heavens, like a thunderclap. Then, his eyes went wide as he looked incredulously at the turtle shell, which was wrapped in sword lights. Rumble! Countless sword lights were torn apart, and the turtle shell bulged. It was as if a ball had burst out of it. Countless sword lights were torn apart and destroyed. In the end, a huge, dazzling golden energy ball came into view. The speed of the energy ball was extremely fast. With a whooshing sound, it approached. It brought with it an immense pressure and an incomparably terrifying oppressive aura. Sword Demon Patriarch's face froze. He did not expect that something like this would come out of the turtle shell. The energy contained in this huge energy ball was incomparably terrifying. From its appearance, it looked a bit like a beef meatball that had been enlarged countless times. But who had ever seen such a huge beef meatball? Rumble! The air was oppressive, and the hurricane suddenly went berserk. The sky was torn apart, and the wind it stirred up was extremely terrifying. Sword Demon Patriarch murmured to himself. Then, he rose to his feet and flew away on his flying sword like a madman. However, he did not expect the speed of the artillery shell to be so fast. In an instant it closed in on his body. Boom! There was an explosion. The energy suddenly engulfed his body, accompanied by his incomparably terrified and miserable howls. And the torn clothes on his body, boom! The energy ball fell to the ground. The entire Earth prison seemed to feel the tremor. After shaking violently for a while, ripples of energy spread out from the ring. Smoke and dust swirled up like a wave, boom! The hearts of all the onlookers almost stopped beating. At this moment they seemed to have gone deaf, and all of them lay on the ground, motionless. Countless clouds of dust rolled up and buried them under the ground. However, with their cultivation bases, they were not afraid of being buried at this level. Most importantly, the power of the shockwave was too terrible. Some of the minor saints, who were standing close to the explosion, were sent flying several hundred meters away in an instant. They had been afraid of the shockwave from the great sage's battle, so they had run far away. However, they never thought that they would still be in trouble. After being hit by the energy ripples, some of them suffered internal injuries and kept coughing up blood. It was hard to imagine how miserable Sword Demon Patriarch, who was in the center of the energy supply, was. In the Black Temple, after the green energy shield blocked the aftermath of the attack, it slowly dissipated. The scene inside was revealed. Gray-green-haired Bufang narrowed his eyes, chuckling as he stroked Little Hu in his arms. After firing the cannon, Foxy opened its mouth wide and burped, and all the fat on its body shook. His fat jiggled, and smoke seemed to waft out of his mouth. Buzz, the black turtle possession, was removed. His grayish-green hair slowly dissipated and turned black. Bufang picked up Little Hu and looked at him carefully. The Gatling gun had turned into a howitzer. It was a little amazing. It seemed that he hadn't raised Little Hu in vain. After picking up Little Hu and putting him on his shoulder, Bufang turned his head and looked behind him. The invisible vortex kept spinning. Obviously, Lord Go had begun his breakthrough. Bufang exhaled softly. He shook his hand. Immediately, a few explosive meatballs appeared. He stuffed the meatballs into Little Hu's mouth, and Little Hu ate them happily. Swoosh, smoke and dust drifted away. The spectators in the distance rose to their feet one after another. Looking at the ground, they all sucked in a cold breath. The inside of the Black Temple had long been destroyed, and it was full of broken lines. At this moment there was a huge pit in the middle from which smoke was rising straight up, rumble. The clouds were rolling in the sky. Then, several figures slowly floated down from the sky. Hades, Era, Ice Saint, and the Heavenly Nether Puppet? Bufang held Little Hu in his arms. When he looked up at the figures drifting down from the sky, a puzzled look came into his eyes. Swoosh! The ruins trembled. Sword Demon Patriarch crawled out in a sorry state. His body was charred black, and his clothes were torn. He looked very miserable. When he saw the Heavenly Nether Puppet, his eyes lit up. Heavenly Nether Puppet! Kill them! Kill them all! Sword Demon Patriarch roared. He knew that this Heavenly Nether Puppet was sent by Nether Puppeteer Patriarch to help him, and his strength was extremely terrifying. In the sky, the Heavenly Nether Puppet turned his eyes and slowly rested them on Sword Demon Patriarch. Then, blasts of air swirled, and the force of impact behind him slowly weakened. The Heavenly Nether Puppet landed beside Sword Demon Patriarch. "What are you doing? Go and kill them! Hurry up!" When Sword Demon Patriarch saw the Heavenly Nether Puppet land beside him, he froze for a moment. Then, his expression changed, and he roared. Hades, Era, and Ice Saint landed beside Bufang. They looked at the ground that had been destroyed beyond recognition and sucked in a breath of cold air. What did Bufang do just now to hurt Sword Demon Patriarch so badly? That blast just now should have the power of a 9-revolution great sage. Bufang was a little puzzled. When he saw the look on Hades, Era, and Ice Saint's faces, he became even more puzzled. There's going to be a good show. Hades, Era raised a hand, pulled his hair, and turned to Bufang. In the distance, Sword Demon Patriarch roared at the Heavenly Nether Puppet. Suddenly, a faint smile appeared on Tiansang's face, and the corners of his mouth curved upward. The curvature almost scared Sword Demon Patriarch's heart out of his chest. "You!" Sword Demon Patriarch froze, and his mouth fell open in disbelief. He raised a hand and pointed at the Heavenly Nether Puppet, dumbfounded. Was he hallucinating just now? He couldn't believe he saw the puppet smile. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch had said that his puppets never smiled. The heavenly Nether puppet raised his hand and slapped it down. It hit Sword Demon Patriarch in the face. Sword Demon Patriarch staggered a few steps back, and his eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Sword Demon Patriarch roared. However, the only response he got was the heavenly Nether puppet's slap. "Who did you say I should kill? Who are you ordering around? Don't you King recognize me?" With each slap, Sword Demon Patriarch's face was swollen. Sword Demon Patriarch staggered and fell to the ground, looking at the heavenly Nether puppet in horror. You are not the heavenly Nether puppet. You are Hades Tenzang." Sword Demon Patriarch finally knew the truth. He had finally told him the truth. However, the truth made him shiver all over. How did this happen? Hades Tenzang was dead, and the dead could not be brought back to life. Even his body was made into a puppet by Nether Puppeteer Patriarch. How could this guy come back to life? How could Hades Tenzang come back to life? Even when Tiansong was summoned by Hades' era, he was not so shocked. That was Tiansong's soul, and he could not stay in this world for long. However, at this moment, the words of the heavenly Nether puppet with Hades Tenzang's face made him feel as if he had encountered the worst nightmare in the world. "I have to thank Nether Puppeteer. If it weren't for him, I might not have a fleshly body to come back to life," Hades Tenzang said. Of course, it was too early to say that he could come back to life. After all, his soul was summoned here, and he could not stay in this world for long. Once the time was up, he might disappear again. So he had to find a way. However, even if he disappeared again, he could not use the heavenly Nether puppet because he had destroyed the spiritual imprint in it. Impossible. How could you come back to life? How could you break free from the power of the law? Sword Demon Patriarch was as mad as a madman, and he scrambled backward. His face was filled with disbelief. He raised his hand. Buzz, the flying sword that had fallen in the distance, fell into his hand. Grabbing it, Sword Demon Patriarch rushed toward Tiansong like a madman. Tiansong watched indifferently. Then, he raised his hand. A clanging sound rang out. The metal plate opened. Crimson energy was gathering. "I have to say that this attack is really extraordinary," Tiansong said. As soon as his voice rang out, a crimson ray shot out of his hand. It was extremely fast, as if it could pierce through everything. Sword Demon Patriarch's pupils constricted. He raised his flying sword to block it. However, the cruel truth chilled his heart. Both he and his sword were pierced by the ray, and a hole the size of an index finger appeared between his brows. A soul was howling in pain. The power of the ray was so terrible that it burned even the soul into nothingness. A thud rang out. Sword Demon Patriarch's body fell to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Another Nether Prison Patriarch had fallen in Earth Prison. A clanging sound rang out. Tiansong came to the Black Temple. He seemed to be very happy with the puppet body. He raised his head and glanced at the tightly shut door of the palace. "Earth Prison Dog has taken that step as well? It's not easy." Tiansong took a deep breath and said. Bufang held Little Hu in his arms and looked at Tiansong. This was the first time he had met this legendary man. "He's Hades' era's father, Ice Saint's lover. He's also Yu's adoptive father. Well, sort of." A ripping sound rang out. The void was torn apart. The Netherworld ship sped out of it. Nethery sat on the Netherworld ship's deck and walked out. When she saw Tiansong, she couldn't believe her eyes. You didn't expect that Tiansong would come back to life in such an unconventional way. Bufang studied Hades Tenzang's body. It was somewhat similar to Xiao Bai's, but compared to Xiao Bai's fat appearance, it looked more mechanical. Did he summon Hades Tenzang's soul with the fortune flatbread, and then it took over this puppet's body? Bufang stroked Little Hu's head, then turned to Tiansong and the others. Tiansong nodded. When the others heard Bufang's words, their expressions changed. That's right. What they were worried about had happened. The soul summoned by the fortune flatbread had a time limit, and it could only exist in this world for a short time. It would dissipate soon. After a person dies, they will enter a primal chaos. I don't know why I was summoned here, but I feel as if there is an unparalleled force pulling at my soul. After arriving in this world, my memories of that place have become blurry. I can only vaguely remember calling that place reincarnation. Tian Tsang raised his hand and rubbed his head. Reincarnation? Bufang arched his brows. Was there really a place called reincarnation in this world? All of a sudden Hades Tenzang's eyes flickered. From time to time, a mechanical light flashed. It's almost time. Tian Tsang was calm. He knew that the time he could summon to this world was limited. Hades' era and Ice Saint's expressions changed instantly. You looked anxious as well. Bufang, do you have a way to help Lord Hades? You suddenly grabbed Bufang's arm, looking at Bufang with a pleading look. What? Bufang glanced at you. It was the first time he had seen you in such a mood. Then, he looked at Hades' era and Ice Saint, who looked sad. Bufang exhaled softly. He didn't know if it would work or not. Just as Hades Tenzang had said, he had a mysterious force in his body, which might be the so-called power of the law. It was just like the power of the Forbidden Land that the Lord and the others had suffered. If he wanted to suppress the power of the Forbidden Land, perhaps only that thing could do it. Protect me and Hades Tenzang. We can't be disturbed during this time. He handed Foxy to Nethery and said in a serious tone, Don't worry. That gave everyone pause. Could it be that Bufang really had a way? Near Sword Demon Patriarch's body, suddenly, the void was torn apart. Terrible nether energy surged out of it. A stooped figure slowly walked out of it. A terrible aura filled the air. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch walked out of it and glanced sideways at Sword Demon Patriarch, who lay lifeless on the ground. Then, he turned to look at the black temple in the distance. Within his turbid eyes, there was a terrifying destructive power sweeping out. Chapter 1351. Protector. The eyes of Hades' era and the others lit up at Bufang's words. Did Bufang really have a way? It was a heaven-defying thing. To bring a dead man back to life was tantamount to going against heaven. Life and death were related to the laws of the world, and how could ordinary people defy the power of the laws? Even a perfected great sage, or someone above the great sage, would not be able to resist the laws. After all, this kind of power was no longer the power of a plain or an aristocratic family. It was the power of an entire universe. Even the great sage was just a speck of dust in the universe. Could Bufang really do it? Of course, whether Bufang could do it or not, they had to give it a try. Not for anything else, but for that ray of hope. With both a body and a soul at the same time, this might be the only chance for Hades Tenzang to be resurrected. If they missed this chance, Hades Tenzang, a legendary figure, would disappear forever in the river of time. So they could not give up this hope. If even hope disappeared, what was the difference between them and a salted fish? So, a grave look came into the eyes of Hades' era and Ice Saint. They retreated from the Black Temple's territory. In the Black Temple, only Hades Tenzang and Bufang were left in their puppet. For a moment, the atmosphere was awkward. Hades Tenzang did not know Bufang. After all, he was a man who lived in the past. At that time, Bufang had not even appeared. Just like when he traveled across the Sea of Stars, Bufang was still playing with a kitchen knife somewhere. One was a legendary figure, and the other was an unknown chef. It was always awkward to get along with them. However, Hades Tenzang was very curious. Looking at Bufang, he always felt that this little chef had an unparalleled charm. It's all thanks to you that I can return to the netherworld, isn't it? I heard that the flatbread you made can bring people good fortune? Hades Tenzang looked at Bufang and said with a smirk. Because he had a puppet face, it was difficult for him to smile. Even though most of the puppets were made up of Hades Tenzang's flesh, the flesh did not belong to him anymore. Hence, it was still a little difficult to control. It was very difficult to reach the level of being able to command it with ease. This was also because Hades Tenzang's spirit had yet to truly fuse with this body. Bufang was thinking at the moment. As if he heard Hades Tenzang's words, he raised his head and cast him a glance. "Oh, daily operations," Bufang said expressionlessly. The corner of Hades Tenzang's mouth twitched. This little chef was really impolite. However, the fact that he could cook the fortune flatbread was indeed heaven-defying. Although the fortune flatbread was about luck, there were some people with heaven-defying luck. Moreover, Hades Tenzang also felt that the fortune was related to the obsession in one's heart. It was not just luck that could pull him out of the transmigration. "What do I need to do?" Hades Tenzang asked. "Resurrection." Of course, he wanted to be resurrected. As someone who had died, he knew how painful it was to die. The transmigration was dark and chaotic, muddle-headed, and one did not know the years. It was not a good feeling. Bufang raised his head again and glanced at Hades Tenzang. "You don't talk." Hades Tenzang was speechless. What a cold and aloof little chef. Bufang's mind was spinning rapidly at the moment. He was thinking about a way to save Hades Tenzang. There was definitely a way. Bufang seemed to have touched something in his heart, but he was still a hair's breadth away. The so-called power of the transmigration should be the same as the power of the law. For example, those experts in the Forbidden Lands were trapped by the power of the law. Otherwise, they would have disappeared with the destruction of the last era tens of thousands of years ago. And the experts of the Forbidden Lands had once had hope. They had been crazy to get their hands on something. That was. Bufang's eyes lit up slightly as if a shooting star had streaked across his mind. That's right. It was the senseless lotus. Whether it was Jean Lu of the Cave of the Fallen Gods or Black Demon of the Black Temple, they all coveted the senseless lotus. For them, the senseless lotus was a key to unlock the shackles of the power of the law. In short, it was a means to deceive the power of the law. However, things were not that simple. Bufang did not think that the senseless lotus could solve the problem. After all, Hades Tenzang was different from the masters of the Forbidden Lands. Hades Tenzang was a dead man. To resurrect a dead man, the power of the law needed to be deceived must be very terrifying. Perhaps it corresponded to a different power of the law. The power of the law of death corresponded to the transmigration, and the transmigration was the so-called power of the law. Bufang's eyes grew brighter as if he was about to grasp something in his mind. Bufang's mind flickered. Then, his spirit went into his spirit sea. He floated in the spirit sea, where 9 vortexes were constantly spinning, emitting a terrible aura. The white tiger, the divine dragon, the vermilion bird, and the black turtle were all hovering in the air. They looked at Bufang. They knew what Bufang was going to do. "Little host, do you really want to do this? At your current level, coming into contact with the power of the law is not good for your future," said the black turtle. The black tortoise spoke. Among the 4 artifact spirits, the black tortoise was the most mature and steady. Once he spoke, he showed the seriousness of the matter. "Then do you think my guess is feasible?" asked Bufang, looking at the black turtle with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Although the path to becoming the god of cooking is difficult and dangerous, if you walk it step by step, the danger won't be too terrible, and it's still within your tolerance range. You still have a chance to break through it. However, once you break the rules and get involved with something more profound at an insufficient level, it will make the future more difficult. You might even fall into the transmigration forever, unable to reincarnate. The black turtle said. That was all he could say. He couldn't say anything more. The black turtle had lived for a long time, and he had experienced many hosts. Although he admired Bufang, that was all. It was enough for him to do things that didn't violate the rules within his ability. Bufang looked at the black turtle and the 4 artifact spirits, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. Since it's confirmed that it's dangerous, it's still dangerous even if it's a little more dangerous. What's the difference? Bufang said. Then, his spirit sea suddenly changed. Rumble. The spirit sea changed in an instant. A rumbling sound rang out. The 4 great artifact spirits landed in 4 corners of the spirit sea. Yin and Yang, the 4 extremes spirit sea. At this moment, Bufang's mental force was highly concentrated. Boom. Bufang suddenly opened his eyes. Heaven and earth farmland. His expression suddenly changed. The senseless lotus growing on the heaven tree suddenly trembled, and then a lotus petal fell. The lotus petal emitted a sparkling radiance, and the radiance surged. The entire heaven and earth farmland seemed to be shrouded in an auspicious radiance. In the grass, the 8 treasures chicken, which was running wildly, suddenly raised its head, its small eyes rolling around. The 8 treasures pig kicked the soil and raised its pig nose. There was still some soil on it. In front of the wooden house, Nyo Han-san was lying on a rocking chair, shaking his head. Owner Bu is going to cause trouble again. Buzz. Bufang raised his palm. Suddenly, a lotus petal slowly appeared in his palm. As soon as this lotus petal appeared, majestic essence energy surged. He glanced at Nether King Tian-sang in the distance. Bufang gently pushed the lotus petal to him. Sit down. Hold it in your mouth. Bufang said. Senseless lotus? Hades Tenzang's eyes suddenly shrank. With his experience, he naturally recognized what Bufang handed him. It was a petal of the senseless lotus. It was actually the senseless lotus. This kid actually had the senseless lotus. Could it be that the terrifying existence in the Bronze Palace had been released? The senseless lotus was the so-called key. Once it was plucked, it meant that the existence in the Bronze Palace had escaped. He took a deep breath. He thought about the terrifying existence in the Bronze Palace above the Acheron River. Even if Hades Tenzang was at his peak, he wouldn't be able to deal with it. That guy was a mysterious existence. However, Hades Tenzang's eyes lit up. With a divine item like the senseless lotus, perhaps Bufang really had a chance to save him? Boom! Boom! Outside the Black Temple, Sword Demon Patriarch's corpse was entangled by numerous black threads. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch, his back hunched, stood beside Sword Demon Patriarch's corpse, his eyes full of indifference. With a flick of his sleeve, he dropped it over Sword Demon Patriarch's head. Swish, a series of rustling sounds rang out. Suddenly, tiny mechanical bugs crawled out of Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's sleeve. Then, they fell onto Sword Demon Patriarch's corpse and crawled toward the huge hole in his forehead. He crawled toward the huge hole in the Sword Demon Patriarch's forehead, and before long, a bone-chilling chewing sound rang out. Wisps of black smoke fell from Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's body and enveloped Sword Demon Patriarch's body. Then, Sword Demon Patriarch, who had been dead, rose to his feet. When he opened his eyes, the whites of his eyes had turned completely black. Looking at Sword Demon Patriarch, the corners of Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's mouth curved upward. I'll call you Sword Puppet. Although you've been refined into a puppet, you've retained your sword intent, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said. Sword Demon Patriarch did not answer. Swish, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's withered palm emerged from his sleeve. His fingers moved nimbly and rhythmically. Then, a cracking sound rang out from Sword Demon Patriarch's body. Buzz, suddenly, a flying sword soared into the sky from the ground. Sword Puppet's body trembled. Then, he took a step forward and charged toward the Black Temple with the flying sword in his hand. In front of the Black Temple, Hades Era, Ice Saint, and you were all standing. Suddenly, A terrible plume of black smoke descended from the sky. A strong pressure swept over. The expressions of Hades' era and the others changed dramatically. "It's coming," Hades' era said, gritting his teeth. He would not allow anyone to ruin his father's resurrection. Holding Hades' halberd, Hades' era's eyes burst with fighting spirit. He stomped his foot hard on the ground. The ground cracked in an instant. At the same time, Hades' era soared into the sky. Holding Hades' halberd, he swung it. The halberd light swept across the sky as if to shatter the whole world. "Come on. Fight!" Nether King Ha roared in the sky. The effect of the fortune flatbread was not over yet, and he still had the fighting prowess of the 9 Revolution great sage. Buzz, what answered him was a beam of sword light. It was extremely terrifying, and when it collided with the halberd light they both shattered. Crack! Crack! Sword Demon Patriarch sped over with the flying sword in his hand. Hades' era's pupils constricted. Sword Demon Patriarch? He cried out involuntarily. Wasn't Sword Demon Patriarch killed by my father? Why did he come back to life? The cold and merciless Sword Demon Patriarch flew over. Then, facing Hades' era, he opened his mouth. The curve of his mouth was so wide that his chin seemed to fall off. A beam of sword energy shot out from his mouth. The sword light was so dazzling that it flashed across the sky in an instant. Hades' era did not have time to dodge, so he could only block it with Hades' halberd. When the beam of sword energy hit Hades' halberd, it split into thousands of tiny sword beams. They turned into thousands of fine sword energies, cutting and leaving fine sword marks on Nether King Ha's face, arms, and feet. Beads of blood oozed out of the wounds. Crack! Crack! Sword Demon Patriarch flew back. Amidst the smoke and dust, a stooped figure slowly stepped out of it. His footsteps were not loud, and they were neither fast nor slow. After a long time, everyone saw him clearly. It was an old man with a head of white hair and a wizened face. The flesh on his cheeks drooped with age, and there were heavy bags under his eyes. One eye was big, while the other was small. "The heavenly nether puppet is my masterpiece. Please give it back to me." A hoarse, old voice rang through the sky. The old man was stooped and had his hands clasped behind his back. The puppet's chin drooped and floated around him. Hiss! All the onlookers sucked in a cold breath. There was no doubt that this man was the creator of the heavenly nether puppet. He was one of the 2 supreme experts of Nether Prison, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch. He was the strongest expert of the Nether Puppeteer clan, the mysterious Nether Prison controller. Chapter 1352. Sit down and keep it in your mouth. His words were ambiguous. The first time he heard it, Hades Tenzang refused. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that he was a patient now, and this little chef had the senseless lotus, which meant that he really had a way to bring him back to life. In that case, he had to sit down. Tian Tsang shoved the senseless lotus into his mouth. As soon as it entered his mouth, a warm aura spread out. As he held the senseless lotus in his mouth, Tian Tsang felt that his unstable soul seemed to have become clearer. It was as if the supreme power that was tugging at his spirit soul had been isolated at this moment. This feeling, it was unprecedentedly good. Tian Tsang's eyes widened as he looked at Bufang with an excited expression on his face. Bufang glanced at him and twitched the corner of his mouth. "Don't talk. Keep it in your mouth." Hades Tenzang nodded immediately and did not struggle. "You are already dead, so the senseless lotus has little effect on you. Although it can delay the time when your soul is pulled back to the transmigration, when the time is up, you will have to leave," Bufang said. He frowned as if he was thinking about something. Hades Tenzang nodded. He understood the reason. It was not easy to come back to life. "So, in addition to the senseless lotus, I need some other means." Bufang touched his chin. "This method shouldn't be easy for you. Yi Zichen said. Bufang looked at Hades Tenzang, and said after a moment of silence. Tian Tsang nodded solemnly. It seemed that he was going all out in order to come back to life. Death was not what he wanted. He still had too many entanglements in this world. So, in order to come back to life, he was willing to bear the pain. In fact, the pain Bufang mentioned was nothing to Tian Tsang. Compared with the despair of never seeing the light of day in the transmigration, the pain Bufang mentioned was more like a relief. He took a serious look at Hades Tenzang. Bufang didn't like to be forced. Even if it was to save someone, Bufang had to do it his own way. From the looks of it, Tian Tsang really wanted to be resurrected. In order to resurrect, he was willing to endure pain. So Bufang nodded. Then I'll take it as a yes, Bufang said. After saying that, he fell into deep thought again. Tian Tsang was puzzled. Bufang took a step back and said lightly, "Don't talk. I'll cook a bowl of noodles for you." Eat in the underworld? Hades Tenzang was stunned. What was the connection between saving him and eating in the underworld? However, Bufang did not answer his question. Zhang Xian thought. The white tiger heaven stove immediately appeared and smashed onto the ground with a loud bang. Smoke and dust swept up. He took out the shining white flour. Bufang poured the flour into a huge blue and white porcelain pot and added the water from the spring of life. As soon as the water, which was overflowing with essence energy, entered the pot, the flour seemed to glow. Bufang wanted to cook noodles, but it was not ordinary noodles. Buzz, his divine will surged. It wrapped around Hades Tenzang. It seemed to have become a world of its own. He took out a spirit beast egg, squeezed the egg liquid, poured it into the flour, and kneaded it together. The kneading process was neither fast nor slow. His divine will slowly seeped into the flour. It was not a simple process. As his divine will seeped into the flour, it seemed to filter the energy in it, turning it into a soft thread. Bam! 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 Tens of thousands of fist shadows appeared, pounding on the flour. Soon, the flour was turned into a dough. He swung his hands to both sides. The dough in the blue and white porcelain pot slowly rotated. It seemed to have turned into a round ball. Watching Bufang cook was actually a kind of enjoyment. It was an enjoyment of art and beauty. At least, Hades Tenzang was dumbfounded. It was the first time he found that cooking could be so artistic. As the dough rotated, it became rounder and rounder. There seemed to be a faint fluorescent light flashing on it, which looked very dazzling. As the dough rotated, Bufang's face became more and more solemn. He had to be serious. Taking a deep breath in his spirit sea, the divine will phantom sitting cross-legged in the middle of the yin and yang spirit sea suddenly opened its eyes. Buzz, his divine will boiled. Highly condensed, it drew a formation in Bufang's palm. That formation was very complicated. Each stroke was condensed by his divine will. In total, there were about 81 strokes. In fact, each gourmet formation was drawn with 81 strokes. It looked complicated, but it was actually very mysterious. Every stroke and every step was done with great care. This formation was the time gourmet array. The time array could control the flow of time. As for how to control it, it depended on the details during the drawing process. Bufang did not dare to make the slightest mistake in handling this matter. If he made a mistake, it would be a disaster for Tian Tsang. Perhaps it would be the last bowl of noodles he would eat. After a long time, the time array was drawn. It floated above Bufang's palm, flashing brilliantly. Bufang's gourmet array had a special feature, which was that it had to be attached to food. He had seen the previous host's gourmet array, but it didn't seem to have such a restriction. But because of that, the previous host didn't have something like a death food tool. The formation continued to spin and a mysterious aura emanated from it. The time array. Bufang controlled the flow of time to slow down. He turned the gourmet array into a tiny dot, then hit the dough. The spinning dough paused for a second. A moment later, Bu Fong put his index finger on top of his middle finger, pulling out a line from the dough. That line was very thin, but with a closer look, one could see that the round gourmet array was embedded in the cut surface of the line. Bu Fong took a step back. His palm began to draw a circle in the air. As he kept shaking and drawing, the line in the dough was constantly pulled out. It began to gather in that circle, growing longer and longer. That circle condensed, turning into a cylinder. The line kept twisting and turning, gradually becoming mesmerizing. Hades Tenzang was shocked. He had never seen such cooking before. Soon, the dough disappeared. The line was filled with the time array. After a certain distance, he would use his divine will to create a formation in the line. One line was filled with so many formations. This was an unusual noodle. From the beginning to the end, it was just one line. Inside the black turtle constellation Wak, the spring of life was boiling, and a piece of rhinoceros meat was tumbling in it, constantly sending energy into the soup. It was the soup base of this bowl of noodles. Bu Fong bent his finger, and the line fell into the soup pot. A strand of noodle continuously slid into the pot. Very quickly, it was completely poured into the pot. On the other side, Bu Fong began to do something else. Outside the Black Temple, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's appearance shocked everyone. Hades Era's hair stood on end, and he had goosebumps all over his body. He had never felt this horrible before. Even when Tyrant Patriarch appeared, he didn't feel so horrible. This Nether Puppeteer Patriarch was very scary. Buzz, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch snapped his fingers. Then, the sound of cracking could be heard again. Another puppet had actually appeared behind him. It was a female puppet, with an enchanting figure that made her look like a devil. Her upper body was plump, and her slender legs were very attractive. However, the weapon in her hand made everyone suck in a cold breath. It was a sledgehammer. The sledgehammer was engraved with veined patterns that constantly flickered with brilliance. At a glance, one could tell that it was not made of ordinary materials. This female puppet belonged to Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's Earth Nether Puppet. Of course, the female puppet's face couldn't be seen clearly because she was wearing a silver metal mask. This old man has 3 puppets: the Heaven Nether Puppet, the Earth Nether Puppet, and the Human Nether Puppet. However, among them, only the Heaven Nether Puppet is this old man's proudest work. It makes me very unhappy that you are unscrupulously occupying this old man's work, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch said faintly. His hoarse voice continued to ring out. With his hands clasped behind his back, he walked slowly forward. Hades Tenzang's eyes turned red in an instant. What was this old man talking about? Hades Tenzang was his father, and he had made his father's body into a puppet. Now, he was showing off in front of him? Damn it! He grabbed Hades's halberd. Hades Era let out a long roar and stamped his foot on the ground. Instantly, the entire ground started to crack open and crumble. Boom! Like a cannonball, he sped up into the sky. Nether King Ha seemed to be able to crush the illusionary void. The Nether King halberd fiercely smashed out, instantly emitting a terrifying halberd light. Noisy. Nether Puppeteer Patriarch glanced at Hades Era and said indifferently. The next moment, the female puppet at his side, the Earth Nether Puppet, moved. She disappeared from where she was as if she had teleported. When she reappeared, she was standing in front of Hades Era. Facing the towering halberd light, she didn't dodge. Wielding the great hammer with one hand, she smashed it toward Hades Era's halberd light. The hammer, the halberd radiance, immediately shattered into pieces like broken glass, falling to the ground and scattering on the ground. However, the power of the great hammer didn't diminish at all. It smashed toward Hades's halberd. Hades Era's pupils constricted. He held Hades's halberd horizontally, trying to block the hammer. Impartially, the hammer hit Hades's halberd. To everyone's horror, Hades's halberd was bent by the hammer. The hammer smashed Hades' Era's chest. Puff! Hades' Era coughed up a mouthful of blood and flew backward like a cannonball. He smashed toward the Black Temple. Ice Saint danced gracefully, her hands turning into ice crystals that filled the sky. The ice crystals shielded Hades' Era's back. Boom! However, as soon as Hades' Era smashed down, the ice crystals shattered with a rumble. Ice Saint, who was blocking Hades' Era's way, kept retreating. She took dozens of steps back, almost crashing into the Black Temple, before she could stabilize herself. Ice Saint's face was a little pale. Was the power of that hammer really that strong? Puff! Hades' Era's eyes widened. He opened his mouth and coughed. Blood kept spurting out of his mouth. The bent Hades's halberd fell to the ground with a clang, sinking it. You held little Who in your arms. Her eyes focused. In the sky, the Earth Nether puppet, who was wielding the great hammer, slowly landed. Her mechanical eyes were full of cold light as she walked toward the Black Temple step by step. Nethery's red lips parted as she exhaled. As Bufang had instructed, she stuffed a fortune flatbread into little Who's mouth. Immediately, Foxy ate the fortune flatbread happily. Then, terrible energy began to brew in his mouth again. She raised her hand and slapped little Who's buttock. Yu's slap seemed to make his fleshy buttocks tremble. Boom! A deafening explosion rang out. The energy that little Who had been brewing in his mouth for a long time suddenly shot out. The terrible counterforce pushed Yu back a few steps. She had to clamp her slender legs together to stabilize her body. A terrible cannonball with a diameter of 8 meters shot out with a rumble. Blasts of air soared into the sky, swirling constantly. The cannonball smashed toward the Earth Nether puppet as if it wanted to destroy her in a flash. In the distance, Nether puppeteer Patriarch's eyes lit up when he saw that. What an interesting little thing. Of course, the Earth Nether puppet didn't dodge little Who's cannonball. She just raised her arm and swung the great hammer in a straight line. The hammer faced the terrible explosive energy that was coming from a distance. A loud bang resounded. The huge explosive meatball cannonball smashed into the big hammer. However, the terrible explosion they had imagined didn't happen. Everyone sucked in their breath. That huge explosive meatball shell was actually absorbed by that huge hammer. The scene shocked everyone. How could this hammer be so heaven-defying? After the hammer absorbed the energy of the explosive meatball, the Earth Nether puppet's eyes turned red in an instant. There seemed to be energy burning on her body. She swung the hammer with both hands. Then, she smashed it down hard toward you. Rumble! A deafening explosion suddenly rang out. A cannonball suddenly shot out from the sledgehammer. It was 8 meters in diameter, and the terrible power of destruction spread. The cannonball that was thrown out hit back again. It smashed toward the Black Temple. Once hit, everything would be destroyed. Chapter 1353. Gulp, gulp. Steaming hot air gushed out of the Black Turtle constellation walk like a dragon roaring to the heavens, rushing into the clouds. It exploded in the air. A thick fragrance of noodles wafted out, making people feel refreshed. Watching the noodles tumble in the Black Turtle constellation walk, Bufang began to cook something else. He plucked plump spirit vegetables from the heaven and earth farmland, which still had jade-like tender leaves hanging on them, blooming like a crystal. After placing the vegetables on the chopping board, Bufang twirled the dragon bone kitchen knife between his fingers. Then, he cut all the spirit vegetables on the chopping board into pieces. The crisp sound of the kitchen knife cutting the vegetables made Tian Song, who was sucking on a lotus leaf in the distance, blink his eyes. After cutting the vegetables, Bufang scooped up all the noodles. They were sparkling like jade, as thin as silk, fluttering like a dragon's whiskers. Bufang poured the steaming hot noodles into a blue and white porcelain bowl. He scooped a spoonful of soup and poured it into the bowl. Instantly, the soup surged, making the noodles float. It looked like a dragon's whiskers stacked in the bowl. Of course, this was not the end of the dish. Bufang put all the cut spirit vegetables into the wok. Under the boiling hot soup, the vegetables quickly softened. Then, he placed the vegetables in the bowl. Crack. He took out a Sacred Realm spirit beast egg. After breaking it, he flung it away. A ball of white flame appeared in his palm. The broken egg immediately floated in the air above his palm. Sizzle, the egg liquid made a sound above his palm, and the egg white suddenly became solid, and the orange yolk also trembled incessantly. Bufang's mental force locked on the yolk. A formation immediately floated in front of him. This time, it wasn't the time array, but the imprisoned gourmet array, that's right. Besides the time array, the imprisoned gourmet array was also necessary. Although the time array could slow down the flow of time and reduce the time taken for Hades Tenzang's spirit to be extracted by the power of law, it could not isolate it. With the addition of the confinement array, the nomological power and Hades Tenzang's spirit would be isolated for a short period of time. This isolation, it wasn't long, but it was enough, plus the time array and the senseless lotus. He could probably revive Hades Tenzang. Of course, the premise was that from now on, Hades Tenzang couldn't live without this bowl of noodles. Gulp, gulp. A strong aroma of egg came out, and the confinement tactical matrix immediately penetrated into the fried egg in Bufang's palm. The egg whites were constantly fluttering. Frying an egg was also a skill, especially an egg with this kind of surface. He couldn't overcook the egg yolk as that would affect the taste. Finally, he could control the temperature to around 70%. That way, the fried egg would show an orange-yellow egg liquid. This egg liquid would condense but not scatter, drip but not thin. Zhang Xian waved his hand. The tactical matrix was integrated into the fried egg, which fell into the porcelain bowl. It just covered half of the bowl, and when it was done, this bowl of noodles was also a great success. There was no meat. It was a very simple bowl of noodles, with only a fried egg and some vegetables. Although there was a lot of noodles in the bowl, in fact, there was only one. It was a simple bowl of noodles. Bufang called it Dragon Whisker Noodles, or Longevity Noodles. Hades Tenzang was surprised, watching from the side. Watching Bufang cook, he felt like he was watching a shocking artistic performance. His whole body and mind were intoxicated by it. He had to admit that cooking was sometimes broad and profound. Bufang held the bowl of noodles, which was steaming hot. Glancing at Hades Tenzang, the corners of his mouth rose. Finally, this bowl of noodles was done. This small bowl of noodles contained 2 kinds of gourmet arrays. To perfectly blend these 2 gourmet arrays, Bufang had put in a lot of effort. It looked like a simple bowl of noodles, but it was more difficult to cook than some complicated dishes. He hoped that this bowl of noodles could help Hades Tenzang. Mainly Bufang wasn't sure how effective this bowl of noodles would be. Because everything was just his conjecture. Whether it could isolate the power of law or not, he could only give it a try. If it didn't work, Bufang had tried his best. Hades Tenzang sat cross-legged on the ground. Bufang didn't let him get up. He walked to Tiansong. He handed the noodles to Tiansong. The noodles are done. Eat the lotus slices. Bufang looked at Tiansong and said seriously. Tiansong was bewildered. It was that simple? Could a bowl of noodles help him resurrect? Wasn't it a little too hasty? From a scientific point of view, the probability should be quite high, Bufang said in a serious tone. Bufang was so serious that Hades Tenzang didn't know how to refute him. Since he couldn't refute him, he would just eat it. He rolled up his tongue and swallowed the piece of the senseless lotus in his mouth into his stomach. Then, he picked up the bowl of noodles that Bufang handed to him and prepared to eat. This bowl of noodles looked quite simple. There were no complicated dishes at all. Hades Tenzang sat cross-legged on the ground, holding the bowl in one hand and chopsticks in the other. He glanced at Bufang, then put his mouth to the bowl and took a sip of the soup. Gulp. The rich soup poured into his mouth. Tian-tsang's almost numb mouth immediately became active. His lost sense of taste seemed to return at this moment. Tian-tsang's eyes lit up. This noodle soup is really delicious. Not only did it work on his tongue and taste buds, but it also made his spirit feel a burst of joy. Hades Tenzang narrowed his eyes. He reached out his chopsticks and picked up the omelet. Then, he put the omelet into his mouth and gently bit it. Sizzle! The omelet was broken, and the orange-yellow liquid flowed out. It didn't flow fast, but it was like a sticky maltose. This kind of speed actually gave people a strange kind of enjoyment. He rolled his tongue. The liquid was mellow and fragrant. Although it was sticky, it gave him a sense of happiness that he had never felt before. Bufang watched Hades Tenzang eat, and he couldn't help but feel hungry. Perhaps this bowl of noodles was too tempting. Although it was just a simple bowl of noodles, it was not ordinary noodles. There would be more surprises later. Hades Tenzang picked up the vegetables. When the vegetables entered his mouth, they were not scalded. Instead, they were crispy, bringing with them a refreshing taste that penetrated his soul and made his mind throb. It was an indescribable feeling. After eating the omelet and the vegetables, it was time for the main character. He was the main character of this bowl of dragon whisker noodles. His chopsticks picked up the noodles, trying to find the bottom of the noodles. Hades Tenzang kept raising his hands, but he found that the noodles seemed to have no end. He even put the bowl on the ground, stood on his tiptoes, and still couldn't find the end of the noodles. Don't waste your energy. Suck it slowly, Bufang said. Hades Tenzang grinned. He put a piece of noodles into his mouth. A suction force burst out from his mouth. Sizzle! Sizzle! The noodles immediately rushed into his mouth. A long and narrow noodle, like a dragon's whisker, kept twisting and floating as he sucked. The noodles swayed, and the soup around them burst out, drilling into his mouth. Tian-tsang's eyes grew wider and wider. He felt as if he was about to reach the end of the bowl of noodles. Sizzle! Finally! He jerked his head. The end of the noodles swayed and the soup splashed. All the noodles went into his mouth. Finally, he finished eating. Hades Tenzang seemed to have an urge to cry. Of course, he couldn't cry at this moment. Holding the bowl of soup, he gulped the steaming hot noodles into his mouth. Hades Tenzang felt that this bowl of noodles was the most delicious food he had eaten since he was a child. He fell head over heels for this bowl of noodles. When Hades Tenzang finished the noodles, Bufang's eyes focused. It's starting. Boom. Bufang's spirit sea suddenly boiled. A moment later, the divine will phantom opened its eyes again. Bufang also sat cross-legged in front of Hades Tenzang. Don't talk. Start to feel the changes. We can't make any mistakes. What we need to do next is to deceive Samsara, Bufang said seriously. Hades Tenzang's eyes focused, nodding solemnly. He opened his mouth and let out a burp. Buzz, a dazzling golden light suddenly burst out from Hades Tenzang's body. Time, confinement, and the lotus petal of the senseless lotus erupted at the same time. Hades Tenzang felt his soul seem to be floating. His body bloomed with a dazzling golden halo. Rings of light emerged from the top of his head and fell down in circles, wrapping his body up. It was like a cage, trapping him. Bufang closed his eyes, raising his hand, his palm hovering by the side of the golden halo. Boom! Just for a moment Bufang felt as if he had entered a mysterious space. The world was spinning. A series of footsteps rang out. Bufang turned around, looking at the domineering figure in the distance. His eyes instantly focused. That figure was Hades Tenzang. However, at this moment, Hades Tenzang didn't have a puppet body. Rumble! Above the sky, there was a gray brilliance surging, like a piece of chaos. Bufang and Hades Tenzang both raised their heads, looking at the sky. This sky seemed a little different. Hades Tenzang looked at it, his eyes emotionless. He gently exhaled, as if he was talking to Bufang. This sky is samsara. Boom! Boom! Inside the Black Temple, a mysterious light suddenly burst out. Nether King Ha crawled up from the ground. His eyes suddenly revealed a sharp light. This light was different from the whirlpool that Lord Go had broken through. Without a doubt, this was not caused by the Lord Go. Since it was not the Lord Go, there was only one possibility. Bufang was resurrecting Hades Tenzang. I can't let them destroy the hope of Dad's resurrection. The Hades armor on Hades Era's body caved in. That was where the sledgehammer had hit. That earth nether puppet was somewhat strong. Rumble! A terrifying cannonball swept over from the distance, rolling and rolling as if it wanted to sweep through the world. It was the explosive meatball that Little Who had shot out. However, at this moment, the cannonball had turned around and attacked them. It was their weapon, but it had become a means to deal with them. That sledgehammer was too magical. Ice Saint's face was cold. Her body bounced up. She raised her hand. Starting from under her feet, a storm began to spread, shooting up into the sky. Puff, however, as soon as she began to use this powerful force, her entire body ached as if it was being pricked by needles. She coughed blood. Her blood dyed the ice crystals red. As the master of the god Vanishing Mountain's forbidden land, Ice Saint was also punished by the power of the law. Buzz, eventually the ice wall was built. It blocked the cannonball. Boom! The cannonball hit the ice wall, causing a terrible explosion. Flames soared into the sky, burning the world. At this moment, the entire Earth prison became bright. In a faraway place, Yellow Spring Great Sage turned over and rose to his feet. Rubble fell from the sky. He saw the blazing vault of heaven. Taking out the green jade jar, he drank another mouthful of wine. After drinking the wine, he pinched his index finger and thumb together, put them in his mouth, and whistled. It was as if a dragon was calling to him. Rumble! Rumble! A moment later, a blood-illuminating dragon spread its wings and flew over from the distant horizon. Soon, it landed in front of Great Sage Acheron. Great Sage Acheron flipped up. Under the treatment of Acheron's wine of helplessness, his wounds were healed. Stepping on the blood-illuminating dragon's back, he gently patted its head and pointed in the direction of the Black Temple. The blood-illuminating dragon's eyes focused. Flapping its wings, it soared into the sky and flew toward the Black Temple. Sizzle, crack, crack, a series of cracking noises rang out. The thick ice wall was already full of cracks. The cannonball's attack was so terrifying that it created a huge dent on the other side of the ice wall, but in the end it blocked it. Ice Saint staggered, coughing up blood from her nose and mouth. She didn't want anyone to stop Hades Tenzang's resurrection. Foxy curled up in Nethery's arms, and its chubby body seemed to be squeezing into a ball. His mouth was open, and his eyes were wide as if he was puzzled by the cannonball that had bounced back. It was clearly something he had spat out. Why did it come back on its own? It blocked it? Hades Era exhaled. Suddenly, his pupils shrank. Sitting on the Netherworld ship, Yu's eyes also narrowed. Behind the ice wall, there seemed to be a blurry silhouette emerging. That figure swung his sledgehammer and fiercely smashed it against the ice wall. Boom! The ice wall, which was already an arrow at the end of its flight, could not withstand the hammer's attack. It completely cracked and shattered, ice crystals splashed all over the ground. Boom! The Earth Nether puppet's graceful figure emerged in front of them. Tap! Tap! The clear sound of footsteps rang out. Nether puppeteer Patriarch appeared, his back hunched. His cloudy eyes looked at the Black Temple. There were two strange things in the Black Temple. One was a familiar vortex. On the other side, there was a mysterious brilliance bursting forth. What are you doing to my heaven Nether puppet? Altering such a perfect work without permission will be punished. Nether puppeteer Patriarch said in a hoarse voice. Then, he flicked his finger. Immediately, a tiny metal worm shot out, turned into a stream of light, and sped toward the Black Temple. It had broken through the defenses of Hades, Era, Ice Saint, and you. Buzz, as soon as the metal worm broke into the Black Temple, it saw the Heaven Nether puppet and Bu Fong sitting cross-legged on the ground. The golden bracelet emitted endless mysteries. Suddenly, a fan-like hand slammed down fiercely. Slap! The metal worm was slapped to the ground. The ground caved in, and a palm print emerged, with cracks spreading out. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. He raised a hand and scratched his round head. Outside, what the metal worm saw was reflected in Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's eyes. His eyes suddenly became extremely cold. That man's inheritor? You want to resurrect Tian Song? Don't even think about it. Boom! A deafening explosion rang out. The next moment, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch moved. His figure streaked across the sky like a beam of light, and with a terrible aura and pressure, he was about to break into the Black Temple. He was confident that no one present could stop him. He raised his withered palm, which was full of terrible energy. He wanted to destroy everything with one palm. Suddenly, Nether Puppeteer Patriarch's pupils constricted. A fair and tender little hand appeared and grabbed his withered palm. A ghostly green aura appeared on the little hand. It surged slowly. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.